Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories podcast. It is April 19th, 2024. We're live streaming, and today we are super excited to be covering alleged, I think convicted, is that right? Potential murderer, Chad Daybell. I just hacked that already. Chad Daybell's trial has begun. I believe we're 2 weeks into it. We're going to be talking about the Mormon angle to the 2 weeks that have passed so far, to kind of see what's going on there. And to join us in this discussion, we have Lauren Matthias Johnson. Is that right? From Hidden True Crime Podcast. Hey, Lauren.
Hey.
How do you say it? How do you say your name publicly?
Laura, it would technically be Lauren Johnson Matthias, and these days I go by Lauren Matthias.
Okay, yeah. Lauren Matthias. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
Lauren Matthias, her and her husband, Dr. John, they have an amazing YouTube channel that does hidden true crime, and you ought to check it out. Go subscribe to it. Now, we're also really excited to have Megan Connor. Megan also has a brand new podcast. She is also known as Lori Vallow's niece, a cousin, among many other things. I'm flustered. Hey, Megan, how you doing?
Hey, John. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah. It's great to have you both. And we've had both of you on several times on Mormon Stories podcast before, not just talking about Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow. Lauren, we haven't had you tell your story yet, so maybe we're going to do that someday. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. We're talking.
And Megan, we've had you on to tell your story, right?
Yes, I was with you almost exactly a year ago.
Yeah, that's amazing. And sometimes our friend Mindy joins us. Today's episode was brought to you by Gerardo. He wasn't able to join us today, but we've covered a lot so far, so go back and check our archive for those episodes. All right, so to begin, I think, why don't we want to welcome our live stream audiences. Megan, did you tell people about your new channel? Do you want to mention it really quick?
Sure. Yeah. My podcast is called The Midlife Revolution, and it's starting to premiere on YouTube. The first episode came out on Tuesday night, and it's available anywhere you get your podcasts. But my YouTube channel is at @3rd_verse. That's all my Instagram, TikTok, all my social media handles are at @3rd_verse.
All right. I'm excited for you to be joining the YouTube ranks, Megan.
Yeah.
All right, so let's begin. Let's just assume there's some people let's just spend a minute or two with a little bit of background and kind of any background on the trial that we should be providing before we jump into the video. Lauren, I think you are in Boise attending every single hour of trial. Is that right?
That is correct. And I also want to apologize. And probably the reason you were flustered because I was having travel technical difficulties and John was trying to fix them for me. I made us late. So I take the blame for your being flustered at the beginning of this.
I wish we could blame it on that, but I'll go with it. All right, Lauren, what should all of our viewers and listeners know about the background and or the, behind the scenes leading up to this trial that people should know?
Okay. All right. Wow. Well, first off, as I told John DeLynn, and I'll say it again, true crime has never been more Mormon stories than it is right now when it comes to the Chad Daybell trial. So this starts with two people, Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell. Both of their spouses die under mysterious circumstances in 2019. Not so mysterious anymore. Lori Vallow has now been charged in her husband's death, and both of them have been charged in Chad's wife's death. Then the two lovebirds get married, and Lori Vallow's children mysteriously disappear. They are found in June of 2020 in Chad Daybell's yard. Their remains. Both JJ, 7-year-old JJ Vallow, and 16-year-old Tylee Ryan, brother and sister Lori Vallow, Daybell's children. It's a heartbreaking, terrible scene. Fast forward to last year. Lori Vallow is in trial here in Ada County in Boise, Idaho, and she is convicted on Tammy Daybell's death. That's Chad Daybell's wife of 30 years, the mother to his 5 children, in JJ Vallow's death and in Tylee Ryan's death, and she is given 3 consecutive life sentences in prison. She was sentenced in July of 2023. And now here we are a year later, and this is who was once her co-defendant. The trials have now been split, and Chad Daybell faces the death penalty in these 3 deaths. There's also, just to remind people, another death, Charles Vallow in Arizona, but this is Idaho. So right now we are covering the 3 murders that happened in Idaho. So may justice be served. And here we are. Chad Daybell is in day 7 today of his trial that they expect to last possibly 10 weeks. That's what they told the jury during jury selection. I have already been here. I flew in Easter Sunday, and I have been here ever since, covering the trial every day. I go live at lunch. I'm in the trial stream, chatting with people, and here we are today.
Megan, can you believe Lauren was able to rifle that off spontaneously without any notes?
Yes, I can believe it, because she's been doing this for almost 4 years now. So
And she's brilliant, right?
yes, and she's brilliant. Yeah.
Megan, is there anything you would add to Lauren's amazing intro, just from your point of view?
I mean, really just that it's been a saga that started in 2019 when I first saw the Facebook post that Lori's husband, Charles, had been shot. And it was shocking and horrifying. And what's sad about it is that it's divided our family. It's changed all of the family members. One of the people that interviewed me made the comment that murderers kill their families too. And there definitely have been the death of a lot of relationships because of how this has all happened. And it's just been it's been a hard journey, but I've tried to make the most of it by talking about the toxic family dynamics that lead to these kinds of tragedies, and by trying to help people recognize those dynamics and find healthier ways to relate with each other in families.
Love it. Thank you, Megan. Lauren, what about the main characters or actors in this trial? And anything we want to say about the Mormonness of this trial for the Never Mormons who are joining us today?
Oh yeah, I left out a big piece. I was given the basics, and I left out one of the major parts in any crime, which is the motive. In this case, there are many, but there are some very unusual and unique ones, and that is where the Mormon or LDS faith comes in. So when it comes to this case, and then I'll jump to the trial, but just in general, we have 2 co-defendants who claimed that the children and the spouses that died were zombies, that they were inhabited by evil spirits with names and like Ned and Viola and Hillary, and they were killed to release the body release the evil spirit from the body, and then the body died. You have people that believe in portals in their closets that they hang out in to see each other in different states. And you have people that are believing in past lives, or what they call multiple probations, and that they were tight with Jesus Christ in their past life and lovers in past lives. You have an entire community of preppers online and in person meeting at conferences that believe these beliefs that are coming into play, that preach these things. And you have every single thing that I just shared with you here in trial happening with witness testimony, plus more, plus the idea that Chad Daybell's defense might be an attempt to protect the LDS church. So that's when I texted John. I'm like, it doesn't get more. True crime has never been more Mormon stories than this. And it's heartbreaking. And that's why I'm here. And I know that I crack jokes because dark humor gets me through, but it is beyond just belief to any regular human being. And it's something that I've been trying to tackle for 4 years because I don't know how we got here. And I've been trying to figure it out for 4.5 years now.
Love it. And if I can just add my view on kind of some aspects of the Mormon angle, it's probably obvious to everyone that both Chad and Lori are, at the time of the murders, were active, faithful members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in good standing. Y'all please interrupt me if I'm wrong. They were in good standing. As I understand it, they had temple recommends, which shows sort of the highest level of Mormon church sort of participation. They believed in God. They believed in Jesus Christ. So they were Christians. They believed in the Book of Mormon. They believed in the prophet Joseph Smith. And there's so many aspects. They believed like many, let's just say fundamentalist Christians or evangelical Christians, they believe in the second coming of Jesus, that it's soon. That's a very core belief. Latter-day Saints in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints means Jesus is coming soon. That's why the prepper movement is so strong within the Mormon church. They believe in spirits, that spirits come in and out of bodies, that evil spirits can come in and out of bodies. That's mainstream Orthodox Mormonism. They believe in demonic possession, which means that evil demons are all around us and they can come in our bodies at any time. That's core Orthodox Mormon doctrine. That's in Mormon scriptures. That's in Mormon teachings, and that's also just in Christian teachings. They believe in the Holy Ghost, and that if you listen to God and Jesus and the Holy Ghost, the feelings and the thoughts that come into your brain can be from God and Jesus or from Satan. But if Chad's inspired and he's acting in a prophetic role with Lori, it's partly because he's been taught that his thoughts and feelings come from God, come from the Holy Ghost, and are revelations from God and Jesus. And I think that's a big part of this. They believe in the ability to communicate with spirits who have passed on. That's very core Orthodox Mormon doctrine. Joseph Smith received angelic visitations, spoke with angels, etc. That's all core Mormon doctrine. They believe in patriarchal blessings, which is the ability to receive a priesthood blessing and then be told what you're supposed to do by the person whose hands are laid upon your head, who has the priesthood. That's something that's, I think, is going to show up in today's episode. There are just so many, what a lot of people are, always debating over how Mormon are Chad and Lori. And what I like to say is every spiritual or religious or supernatural teaching they have is either core Orthodox Mormon doctrine or like built on core tenets of Mormon doctrine, and then one step further. So this idea of zombies may sound not Mormon at all, but it is, because basically what it means is the person, their body, they were alive, somehow this evil spirit or demonic spirit possessed them, which is all Orthodox Mormonism, and then the twist they add is that must have kicked out their base core spirit. And then, of course, that means you can kill him. So that's the twist, but it's rooted in core Mormon doctrine and theology. And that's why I don't like the idea of giving the church too much of a pass by claiming that that's fringe, non-Orthodox Mormon doctrine when it's built on core aspects of Mormon doctrine and theology. Now, I've been talking a lot. Lauren and Megan, please correct me, because y'all both are either currently active faithful Mormons or you were. And so you guys can check me as much as you want. Please do.
Well, the defense would love you right now, because that's exactly what John Pryor is trying to argue in there. And I think it takes away from the fact that what the prosecution is trying to argue and show with their witnesses is that Chad Daybell, he created this belief system. He is the author of this belief system, and he convinced Lori and Melanie and their crew of circle of friends that believed in this to follow him and look to him for guidance, where the defense is trying to say, and working there with Chad Daybell, trying to say, no, the scales of light and dark, that's LDS teaching. I want to give my perspective. I agree with what you're saying, John, that what you said, words are important. What you said is true, that evil spirits possessing by core Orthodox Mormon teachings, and then them taking it a step or two further. I would say maybe a couple steps further. And I would also say it might be core Christian beliefs. It was Christ that cast out evil spirits from people. And so this isn't beyond the scope of just Christianity in general and taking that a step further. And I say that this isn't a Mormon issue. I'm a true crime channel, and I have seen a lot of crimes in recent years that have to do with people believing Christian beliefs that are hurting children. And so my goal is to simply state this is a problem in general, and we got to look at it broadly. A little girl in California who dies in an exorcism at a church, and on. That's just one example. A surfer teacher, Matthew Coleman, who took his children, believing that they were zombies over the border in Mexico and slaughtered them. So I just want to state that, yes, these are people that have strong religious beliefs, whether Christian, evangelical, Mormon, and taking it a step further. And this is happening. So I think I don't want to disagree with you, but I want to broaden it, is maybe what I want to say.
Perfect. And please disagree with me, because I love it when people do. Megan, anything you want to add in response to anything Lauren and I just said, or no?
No, I think you both encapsulated it perfectly. And I think the horrifying thing to me continues to be that this group of people did not disperse when Lori Vallow got arrested and convicted, and they did not disperse when Chad Daybell got arrested, and they have still not dispersed. There are still people out there in these fringe groups talking about this belief system and spreading this belief system amongst each other, and quietly whispering that the leadership of the church has gone astray. And so it's a movement that is still out there, and I fear that we're going to continue to see more crimes like this happen because the church refuses to denounce these fringe groups, and with their tacit approval, their silence gives tacit approval to their actions and to their theology and to everything that they do. And we have in fact already seen more crimes. Blaise Thibodeau, who was kidnapped and taken up into Canada because his family believed the same things. They were the Visions of Glory crew. And so just these harmful teachings are still out there. People still believe them. And we're getting silence from Salt Lake City. And it's going to continue to perpetuate. And it's terrifying to me.
Thank you. Can I add one more thing too, John? Just another thought.
Oh, please.
Thinking about what you said, as I joked that, the defense would love you right now, which is probably why they asked you to join their expert witness team. They did not ask me, so take this into consideration from where I'm coming from. I've been covering this case for, like I said, nearly 5 years now. And, I do have to agree that, I'm pro prosecution. I'm pro seeing what Chad did. And he did become sort of the leader of this group, whether he's a accidental cult leader or a purposeful cult leader. And he did take these beliefs a step more. Nobody that I know of has learned about zombies in Sunday school, if that's fair to say. I'm not saying that it's not in scriptures possession and in the Bible, but it's not something people are learning every day in church. Necessarily about zombies or a light and dark scale that includes a decimal system. That this is Chad Daybell's light and dark scale, where someone, once they hit 4.6 dark, then they cannot be redeemed. I mean, this is very specific, Chad Daybell. So I do want to give credit where credit's due to Chad Daybell, who's on trial right now. He certainly did create a lot of unique things like this decimal system that has no place in scripture or Mormon history. I just want to emphasize the taking it the one step further and hold him accountable, I think, right now.
And I'll actually agree and add a second to that, Lauren. I do not believe that the average Mormon kills their spouse or the average Mormon kills their kids. I think the average Mormon is a good, kind, thoughtful, law-abiding citizen. So, for sure, I want to make that clear, because that's not at all what I'm saying. Now, there are a lot of really good comments coming in, and a few of them I've flagged because I think they're worth mentioning. The first is around light and dark. While this idea of rating people's lightness or darkness, I would say, is not particularly Orthodox Mormon, the idea of a light countenance and a dark countenance, yes, backed up by the Spirit, and Mormons being able to, like, wow, you have a dark spirit, your countenance is darker, or your countenance is lighter. That's absolutely core Mormon doctrine and theology, and you could not convince me otherwise.
Agree.
That's one example of what Chad's building on. Killa Queen B writes, Visions of Glory needs to be disowned by the LDS Church. We do want to mention the book, Visions of Glory. The author is attributed to John Pontius, but we know that that's actually, what's his name? Tom Harrison. And, that is the number one sold nonfiction book in Utah for 2023 on Thrift. Is it Thrift Books? Is that the name? And again, someone else mentions that that book has not been disowned by the Mormon Church. And as far as we know, Tom Harrison is still in good standing with the church. And of course, we all know that Chad and Lori had their Visions of Glory book under their knee, under Lori's knee, at the poolside in Hawaii when she was when they were first approached by police. Is that right?
Yep.
Correct.
Maven wants to say that the idea of killing for God can be rooted in the Abrahamic story of Abraham being asked to sacrifice his son Isaac. And while that story didn't, God didn't ask Abraham to go through with that, it does introduce the idea of what's called an Abrahamic sacrifice. And in Mormon theology, there is violence, and there has been violence attributed to God's command. And you could argue the Old Testament has that as well. Some people are wanting to mention Tim Ballard shares a lot of these similar types of beliefs as Chad and Lori. And I think that's important. I think it's also important to mention Ruby Franke. One Not Stress mentions Ruby Franke and Jody Hildebrandt. Those are other true crime Mormon stories that we believe are kind of cut out from the same cloth. And we've covered that. In previous episodes. Wolf writes, thanks for the super chat, Wolf. Visions of Glory, more like hallucinations of horror. Thank you for the vids, lunch vids, Lauren. So that's a shout out to your lunch vids. Also, thanks, Wolf, for the super chat. Really quickly, 40 Love Style writes, Mormon beliefs make it easy to jump to what Chad and Lori believe. And I would say it's not easy to jump to murdering your spouse and kids, but we're seeing a lot of Mormon-based true crime, and we've got to talk about it, and that's what we're trying to do. And then, we're going to be talking about the Church of the Firstborn in a minute. Okay, so I think that's a lot of the introduction. I think we can jump into the video now, unless y'all. Oh, Lauren, we're going to talk about some of the main players.
Yeah. Let's talk about the main players. And by the way, side note, did you hear that Tim Ballard is thinking of converting to Catholicism, though? So look out, Catholics.
He's wearing a cross and everything, but that's because the Mormon Church excommunicated him, right?
No, I know. So I'm giving a warning.
Yeah.
There you go, Catholics.
Yeah.
FYI.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So main players. Chad Daybell is clearly the one on trial. He is the person here who we're all focused on, who we found JJ and Tylee in his yard. And then his wife, Tammy Daybell, died on October 19th, 2019 he called 911, Chad did, and was found in their bed, deceased. And then later she was deemed to have been a homicide. So, and that's in Rexburg, Idaho. Lori Vallow was from Arizona originally. Her husband, Charles Vallow, died July 11th, 2019. It was a shooting by her brother, Alex Cox, that he claimed was in self-defense. They were never arrested and moved on. And then that is when Lori moved to Rexburg, Idaho from Chandler, Arizona. And then once she moved, she had this group of friends. Melanie Gibb is her best friend, her bestie, her sister from another mother. They were super tight, bearing their testimony to each other all the time, believing that they were sisters in a past probation or married to the same dude at one, lifetime. And then Melanie Gibbs' side guy, because she started having an affair kind of around the same time, was David Warwick, and he's a visionary as well. And then you have Zulema Pastenes, and she could control the elements, and she married Alex Cox, Lori's brother, and for 2 weeks before then, Alex ended up dying in a mysterious death. And then Chad Daybell was giving everybody blessings right and left, saying they would know when to go to the other side of the veil. That's important. Chad Daybell believed he had multiple near-death experiences, and thus the veil that covers his memory from the heavens and the pre-existence opened up a crack, and he could see into the heavens and beyond. And thus everyone would go to him and clamor to him for answers. And then they all also believed that the second coming was on its way, or the tribulations before the second coming. They're all going to live in these tent cities. And they were all kind of spouse swapping at these preparing a people conferences and firm expos. And those come up in this trial too. Rod Meldrum hasn't come up, but he is the founder of the Firm Expo, and the Firm Expo has now come up. They went to that the day that JJ lost his life, little 7-year-old JJ in Rexburg. And the Preparing a People founders, Mike and Nancy James, they have a prepping conference. They've come up today. Allegedly, Mike, according to John Pryor, that's important too. John Pryor is the attorney for Chad Daybell. And he is actually saying today that Mike and Nancy James, who started the Preparing a People conferences and are just beloved people, that Mike was saying that Nancy was dark. That was a thing today that came out. So they're all calling each other dark. They're all kind of saying they were married to each other in past lives. I kind of call them they all have near-death experiences. And then other players in the trial. So we'll get to that. So again, John Pryor is the defense attorney in this, defending Chad Daybell. And then you have the prosecution, Lindsay Blake and Rob Wood and Rocky Wixom. So you've got 3 prosecution attorneys, and it is wild in there. And if I didn't paint that, I don't know what can, but it's a wild ride every day in the courtroom.
I love it. I love it. A couple quick points. I do also want to say, I think it's fair to say near-death experiences is either a very, let's just say it's a very common Mormon belief, and that near-death experience books are very, very popular amongst Mormons. Am I being unfair there? I mean, whether it's Julie Rowe, whether it's Chad Daybell.
No, yeah, that's fair. And your Mormon stories, I'm true crime. So I also I guess my thing is always emphasize a Christian belief, because again,
right.
I don't want to let anyone, I want to make this noted, but yes, you're right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and when I was a true believing member in the church, I read Visions of Glory as a true believing member. I was super interested in near-death experiences around that time. It was about around the 2010 to 2013 timeframe that a whole bunch of books came out by different authors, all kinds of different Christian authors, not just Mormons. But there was sort of this fervor about that in the church for a couple of years, at least among my community and obviously among Lori's community as well.
Love it. And then I'll add, thank you for that, Megan. And then I'll add this idea of spouse swapping, or of, spiritual wifery. Joseph Smith had over 30 wives. Brigham had over 50 wives. And this idea of spiritual marriages, or just polygamous marriages, 100% Mormon doctrine. It's in Mormon scripture, and nobody is going to convince us otherwise. I just wanted to
I have a question for you about that, John.
Yeah, go ahead.
Does every Mormon offshoot end up go into polygamy? Because it feels like it does. There are offshoots in every religion, subgroups, whatever you want to call them, the extremists, I don't know. And it just feels like no matter which one it is in Mormondom, whether, they are committing crime through blood atonement or, sexual abuse, whatever, in the end, it all goes back to polygamy. And I'm wondering if that feels accurate or not. Is there any that hasn't?
If you picked, there is one. If you picked the top 10 biggest Mormon offshoots, I would say 8 out of 10, aside from the mainstream Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, 8 out of the 10 would be the 8 largest fundamentalist Mormon offshoots, like the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or the AUB, the Apostolic United Brethren, or the All Reds, or the Kingstons. And you can just go down the list of like the top fundamentalist groups. They're all literally polygamist groups, because they were started after the Mormon Church stopped practicing polygamy in the early 1900s. And they're like, wait a minute, the prophets taught, it's in our scriptures, the prophets taught it was required for salvation. And so that's how those groups were formed. The one exception would be what used to be called the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and they've changed their name to Community of Christ. When they started, maybe a couple decades after Joseph died, it was started by Joseph's by Joseph's wife, Emma, and her son, Joseph Smith III. And when they started the Reorganized Church, they lied that Joseph Smith never practiced polygamy and that it was Brigham Young who started polygamy, but that it was never part of the core church. We all know that's not true now. Even the Community of Christ or the Reorganized Church admits that they were wrong, that Joseph Smith absolutely was a polygamist. So I guess, long story short, Lauren, is 1 out of the 10 probably wasn't a polygamist.
Okay.
And
that's right. Yeah. I love the Community of Christ.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So you told us who the judge's name. You've already told us.
Judge Boyce. Sorry. Judge Boyce is the judge. I actually just shared the counsel, but Judge
you
Boyce.
told us the prosecutors and the defendant. Counsel, right?
Correct.
Someone's telling me I'm yelling. Okay. I'll try not to yell. Thank you for that reminder. I'll back up. I don't like to yell. And also, I will add that John Pryor did ask me to be a witness for Chad Daybell, and I asked my friends, just thinking, "Oh, sure, I'll do it." And they're like, "You do not want to give any excuse for Chad to be let off." And then I'm like, "Okay, I won't do it." But I just thought it's an expert. Like, what's wrong with just being an expert? But apparently, that's not.
Well, I know exactly now why. I know exactly where John Pryor is going, and I completely get why he wants.
Can I just say that I did a couple phone calls with John Pryor, and he interviewed me, and this is exactly what he asked me about. He's like, how Mormon are Chad and Lori's beliefs? And he's basically saying that the church and its defenders are going to want to distance Chad and Lori as much as possible. And he told me that part of his strategy is to sort of make sure people understand that Chad and Lori are building on core Mormon beliefs. And so I'm not surprised he's going there, because he interviewed me and I gave him my perspective on all that.
Well, here's a little tea then for you. This was spotted in court yesterday during the last recess. And they were arguing that on the stand with Melanie Gibb was on the stand. That's, again, Lori Vallow's bestie who followed Chad's teachings or whatever it is. And he was questioning Melanie Gibb about her beliefs in zombies and light and dark, and kind of saying, well, isn't this what you believe in the LDS faith? And so last recess, afternoon recess, is essentially like a potty break for all the jurors and everyone. And they're coming back in, and John Pryor is handing Chad a book called No Unhallowed Hand. But it's a Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I believe it's in the missionary library. It's a history of the church. And he had a little bookmark in it, a little orange sticky note. Looked like it was kind of stuck into the middle of the book. And then they also had another book written by Melanie Gibb, the witness, as well, called Field of Fire. And they certainly were trying to, I think, assess and point out where she certainly believed this without Chad Daybell.
Got it. Yeah, interesting. Fascinating. Any thoughts on that, Megan?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting that no unhallowed hand is going to play a part in this. That's really interesting. Obviously John Pryor's got to do his job as a defense attorney to try and distance Chad, from the obviously from the allegations. I just think it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, and hopefully the prosecution is, and I think they are already, they're doing a really good job of sticking to, the narrative that this came from Chad. And I especially liked it that when Melanie Gibb was on the stand, they talked about, Melanie testified that Chad would tell Lori, and then Lori would tell Melanie. And so John Pryor kept focusing on the fact that, all this came from Lori, it came from Lori, but the prosecution did a great job of pointing out that it was Chad who told Lori, and then Lori would just relay the instructions or whatever it was. So we'll see.
All right. Well, it's time to jump to the slides. So we've gathered several clips, some from Lauren, some from Megan, and Gerardo put some together as well. I've seen none of these, so I'm going to be viewing these for the very first time, and I'm going to be reacting authentically.
John Dehlin reacts.
Yeah, John Dehlin reacts. So let's go ahead and roll the first video, and the title of it, Gerardo prepared some speaking notes. John Pryor presents Chad's defense, and then Gerardo writes, blame it on Lori. So that's how Gerardo titled this first clip. So let's roll the clip.
Obviously, we have a situation where someone who's 29 years old, Chad Daybell, 29 years of marriage with Tammy Daybell, no discernible issues in his life. And then Lori Vallow comes in the picture, Miss Texas, with her testimony about this beautiful, vivacious woman, very sexual person, and very manipulative. And she knows how to get what she wants. And she drew Chad Daybell into a relationship, and an unfortunate relationship, that Chad fell into. After that, things started rolling, and issues started happening, but eventually, yes, there was a murder, and there was a burial. And you've heard discussion about the backyard of Chad Daybell. Well, we have a 4.5-acre farm in Fremont County, Idaho. And you'll hear testimony that the body of J.J. Vallow was discovered behind an irrigation pond and a tree out in the pasture.
All right. Well, I'll let each of you give initial reactions. Lauren, why don't you go first on that one? I've got some questions, but why don't you start?
Yeah. Well, I'll start by making you proud, John. This is a very Mormon defense.
Tell us why. I think I know what you said.
This is blaming it. This is purity culture 101. And this is the woman's fault. She was sexy. She was Mrs. Texas, or competing in Mrs. Texas. She was a very sexual being. I think he kept saying that, she liked sex. I mean, this is essentially, this is what we would call today slut shaming. And really, Chad had no control over this vixen who came into his life, and he had no choice left but to just bury 2 children in his pasture. And then, of course, I want to point out the humor in how he's sort of setting this narrative of Chad having this vast landscape. He refers to an irrigation ditch and by the pasture, almost like he's a farmer out plowing the fields. No, just so you know, this is a place where he could see both burial sites from his kitchen and his bedroom window. But I think we also see what he's attempting to do there, imply that Chad could have no idea that 2 children were burnt and dismembered and buried in his yard.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes we laugh at this stuff, but it's obviously not funny. In terms of and Megan, I want to get you in on this as well. In terms of the evidence that we have, and I guess we're going to play it, but is there good evidence that Chad was an instigator, or even maybe more of an instigator than Lori? What's either of your analysis of what the evidence you've reviewed so far seems to convey in terms of like who was, pursuing who and who was manipulating you? Megan, I'll let you answer, and then I'll come back to you, Lauren.
Yeah, when we get to the text message portion of the trial, it's pretty undeniable that Chad was, as they say, driving the bus on this one. He was the one relaying the dark percentages. Lori was the one asking him, how dark are they now? Sort of conveying some impatience that Tammy wasn't dark enough yet. And, Chad was the one who was relaying all of that information. So to me, that's really the main thing that proves more than anything that he was the one who was really directing everybody, all the parties involved, as to what their role was and what they should be doing. I also think the patriarchal blessing that he gives to Alex is a huge indicator of that, because I know that John Pryor is going to try to say that Alex acted on his own. In fact, he's already implied that. He implied it a little bit in his opening statement, where he said that, Alex was Lori's protector, and he had a past history of protecting his sister, and that's what he was doing in this case, and that Chad should be afraid for his life, and essentially, so he's going to try to throw it all on Alex. But when Chad gives his patriarchal blessing to Alex, it's very clear that Chad is telling him what to do, and Chad is the one giving him instructions. So I think there is compelling evidence.
I love it. And Lauren, I'll let you close this slide out, but I will just agree that whether it's the Mormon temple ceremony that's got Eve tempting Adam with the apple, or just lived everyday experience, where so often historically Mormon women have experienced church discipline for some sort of inappropriate sexual relationships where men somehow inexplicably got off the hook. Or just the idea of Mormon modesty culture, where women have to dress modestly. Mormon women have to dress modestly because they're the ones that tempt men, and it's women's job to police the morality of a young man or of a man. That's all very, very Mormon. Lauren, we'll give you the last word before we jump to the next slide.
Yeah. There are 3 Lori Vallow jurors that I've now become close to. In other words, three people who did their civic duty last year and ended up having to listen to weeks and weeks of Lori Vallow's entire trial, sat there and had to decide her fate. They're now fully invested, and I watched them from afar last year. I watched them with tears in their eyes as they looked at autopsy photos of these children. So they're invested in justice, and they're sitting there now every day in Chad's trial as just public. And I've asked each of them if they had to during that trial convict Chad, would they have? With the evidence they saw at Lori's trial, and they have all said yes, absolutely. They see him as the evidence against Lori just as equally damning against Chad. And it seems pretty clear to me, and has always been very clear to me, that this is Chad Daybell's belief system, that he is the one that created the light and dark scale, which is what each person had to fall dark on before they were murdered.
Thank you. Love it.
And I'll just clear the record on one thing too. Lori was not Miss Texas. She competed in the Mrs. Texas pageant. And I think it's just an example of John Pryor taking a little snippet of information and stretching it to fit his narrative, right? Making Lori out to be way worse than she was in some cases, way better than she was in some cases, all in an effort, because she's already been convicted, to try and distance Chad from everything that happened.
Makes sense. All right. Y'all are giving such great perspective, and we're loving the comments coming in. Please do like this episode. Please do subscribe to any of the channels you're joining, and subscribe to each other's channels as well. That helps the algorithms. That helps us grow. With thanks to all the people who donate to what we do, that makes it possible. And we're always grateful for the super chats when they come. All right, let's go to the next. Slide. This is having to do with Chad's daughter, and to what extent is she bothered that bodies were found in the backyard. And I want to give credit to Seriously podcast on TikTok for this clip.
Find the human remains. That's what they told me, that they found human remains. And I said, well, there are several dogs that have been buried there. And he said, respectfully, Emma, I can tell the difference with human remains. And I asked, where was it? And he said, over by the pond under that tree, that it was in the ground and had boards over it. And I can see in your face that surprised you. That he told me that what they're looking at is that they found one body with the probable cause. There's likely two. So I asked, are you going to search the property forever until it's found? And he said, well, no, but we're going to look. And he said, because I said, what about, this is the home for my siblings and there's a baby. And he said, if you're not able to get back in tonight, we'll hook them up with a hotel.
Is Emma part of Chad's cult? Why is she not screaming from the rooftops, why would human remains be found in your backyard? It is so bizarre to me. She just brushes it off like it's no big deal. And she's acting like it's inconceivable for the police to be on the property while they search for Tylee's remains. She's crying to her dad, talking about money, about finances, about Chad's mortgage. Like, make it make sense.
Wow. All right, Megan, let's let you respond first if you've got anything you want to share in response to that video.
Yeah, it's deeply disturbing. And I think that the answer to this, and this is actually was Lauren's explanation, but she and I have talked about this, is that Chad is a very controlling person, and he very likely prepared his children with a narrative that was going to make sense prior to the remains being found. We know that he sent a text to Tammy telling Tammy that he had shot and buried a raccoon on the property on the day actually that one of the children was buried. And so he sort of sets up these stories in advance so that when the truth comes out, he has something plausible to fall back on. And you'll notice his reaction to Emma telling him that there were human remains found on the property. He doesn't really say much. He just says, And then later on in that video, which got played in court, he just changes the subject and goes on to finances. And so it's just this very manipulative way of redirecting the narrative. And it's infuriating to me because having lived in an environment where I was controlled for a really long time, seeing that kind of behavior just makes me so angry because those kids didn't ever have a chance at normalcy of any kind with Chad controlling them in that way. And it's going to take a lot to get them to a place where they can have healthy lives.
Thanks, Megan. Lauren, what's your perspective?
First off, I love that I use Serial Leslie's TikTok. The producer of that podcast is my court friend. So we will sit there and talk, and right after that, that was a bombshell piece of evidence that nobody had seen before when they played that conversation between Chad and Emma in court, and where they talked with one another that the day that the remains were found, and Chad was arrested but had not yet been charged. And we said the same thing. We're like, why is she not asking more questions? Like, all of us in the courtroom agreed that if we just found out that human remains were found in the yard where we lived, we would be like, what? And if we thought our dad was innocent, more importantly, if we thought our dad was innocent, we'd be like, Dad, can you believe it? What's going on? Like, why are they here? Like, we got to figure this out. What do you think? But Chad just switches the subject to talking about finances because he's going away for a long time. And she's just like, oh, yeah, you are. You're going away for a long time. So the question that Annie Elise, the host of Seriously, is asking, is she part of this cult? I would say yes. And I say that from multiple interviews that I have done with people that were invested in Chad Daybell's belief system and Julie Rowe's belief system. And that she was very much a part of this. She narrated Julie Rowe's books. She stood up for Julie Rowe. That is someone that hasn't made it into the trial. But for those that don't know, Julie Rowe is somebody who Chad Daybell was a book publisher, and he published Julie Rowe's near-death experience books. And she sort of really had this similar belief system with Chad until he moved on to Lori. And and so I've also have had other close associates of Chad that I've interviewed say how much she was involved. And I want to say, yes, I think just like Megan says, there's coercive control in this family, and it just shows how far and wide these beliefs are. I've also interviewed someone named Anna, who was part of this Avow website, who said that Garth, the oldest, shared that when he learned that all of his dad's visions were actually real, and it's just sort of common knowledge that everybody believed him. And so my heart goes out to the children. I'm not blaming them for anything by saying that, but I would say that the children, Chad Daybell's children, are very much a part of his cult. And if anyone more so than another, it would be Emma Daybell, who you heard there. And then she also said in the conversation that she was listening to the Spirit, and Chad encouraged her to just let God and Jesus Christ lead. Never mind the remains, but just listen to the Spirit, and we'll see what's next according to Christ.
Thank you, Megan and Lauren. I'll just add that one thing I observe, sort of putting on my psychology hat, the more the high demand religion is, or the more cult-like a religion is, and I think you could argue that Chad and Lori had a cult mindset. We could debate about whether or not the Mormon Church qualifies as a cult. That is an offensive term. I try not to ever use it, but certainly Chad and Lori were in a cult mindset. But regardless, the more high demand the religion is, the more I would argue that that high demand religion tries to nurture a cult identity where you're less encouraged to connect to what you feel and what you think inside. You're more trained to block off your emotions and what's important to you, and to assume the cult or the high demand religion identity. And then there's also, the more cult-like or the more high demand a religion is, the more of an emphasis on obedience to authority and blind belief of an obedience to authority. And it would be my opinion, it would be my observation that Chad's daughter might be, a victim of those types of mentalities.
Yeah, and speaking to,
Yeah.
sorry, didn't mean to talk over
Oh,
you.
please.
Speaking to the patriarchy of the Mormon Church and Mormon families in general, and speaking from the experience of having to do this myself, it's so incredibly difficult to get to the place where you can accept that someone in your family has done something this horrible. And so I'm talking about Emma Daybell. Add on top of that her father is the leader of their family, that you want to trust your father, you want to be submissive to his, you want to be obedient to him because he's the leader, he's the one who's, sets the groundwork for the family system. And add on top of that coercive control, I mean, it's almost impossible to overcome all three of those things and get to the place where you really believe that it's even possible for your dad to do something like that. Yeah.
Good point. Thank you, Megan. All right. Let's go to the next slide, where I believe Chad's daughter talks about following the Spirit. And Chad says it will be in the Lord's hands.
Yeah, they'll let you move out of there. You just get over here. You get guys. It's still
I'd be moving too. That's what the Spirit was telling me, but I didn't know how I felt like I needed to learn more. And now I get it.
So yeah, this is essentially the house, and we'll talk to John Pryor about the financial arrangement, but you should be fine for a while.
I think long enough to get on our feet.
I have a lot in that account with the other attorney, so that will take care of me for a while. And maybe we just do a refinance on the house or a home equity loan. I don't think it's gonna break us. I think that might be an option there. I might need to authorize putting you on the mortgage.
Account with you. And just probably leave Joe off it.
Yeah. Yeah, keep me on it with you. And
Do you have accounts like that when you're in jail?
I don't know.
I guess this is the part you get to that someone else's accounts.
Well, technically Spring Creek Book Company's office, so you can, we'll manage it that way and find a way.
And you have you can send things through Amazon to the jail?
Yeah.
So like I couldn't send you a package, but Amazon, if I ordered it through there, it could get to you.
Yeah.
I'll only do that as you ask for stuff.
Do we think we've covered the main?
Lori would know the Amazon account.
I'll talk to her.
Yeah.
Well, she just said she's going to talk to Lori. Show she's talking to Lori.
So
I
in
think that
there,
was-
gift certificates. So don't pay.
Yeah, I won't.
We'll get it figured out. It's like Cholo 1105. Same as for Loves Elena. At
I
iCloud.com.
haven't
I
met
believe
these
it's-
end at the right time. So do you think we've got the main?
I think, yeah.
I don't know what they're
fine.
gonna do with the computers.
I
You
think
could
so.
probably-
Do
Okay.
you think so, Megan? Keep in mind that, again, they just found human remains in their yard, and this is the conversation
It's like,
happening. They're preparing and talking about finances while she's realizing her dad's going away forever, which my heart breaks. She's crying. She has so much longing in her voice, and her mother is now dead. Her mother's been dead for, less than a year, and now this, and it's so my heart breaks.
Yeah,
And
you move out of there.
Their conversations around finances, and she says, for those wondering what she was saying about the spirit, she said that she felt that she was going to move, and she just didn't know why. She lives across the street at this moment from the house she grew up in. Chad's living in the house he grew up in, where the bodies are, and she said, I just felt like I was going to need to move. I didn't understand why, and now I understand. Just so everybody knows, where she ended up moving is back to this house where the bodies were found. So she moved back into her childhood home.
Yeah, and let's not forget that right before this happened, so Chad is in the back of a police vehicle. Right before this happened, he was, standing near his vehicle, sitting in his vehicle, kind of looking over his shoulder, nervous the whole time that law enforcement is looking in the backyard. And as soon as they find the spot where JJ is buried, Chad takes off in the car and he leaves his children behind. So Emma was there at the house with law enforcement, and Chad just took off. Well, law enforcement intercepted him a little ways down the road, and then they brought him back, put him in the back of the cop car. So this is Emma coming to the cop car after her dad has already fled the scene of them finding these human remains. And the other part I wanted to say was when they're talking about Amazon packages, right? And Chaz says, well, Lori will know the account information. And then Emma says, yeah, I've been talking to her. So Emma's been talking to Lori in prison and ostensibly kind of views her as a mother figure. At one point, she was saying that Lori was helping her grieve. And, they're casually talking about James Loves Elena at iCloud.com is the email address associated with the Amazon package. So I find all that pretty disturbing.
okay. Thanks, Megan. We have a second slide. And by the way, these clips are coming from the Hidden True Crime YouTube channel. So shout out to Lauren and John for that. Megan, there's a second similar slide that's that's shorter.
Yeah.
I want to set this one up, or should we just play it?
It's pretty quick. Just go ahead and play it.
Okay. All right.
Sorry, all the neighbors are gonna be talking, but you just,
This is Chad again.
Mm-hmm.
We're okay, Dad.
and
We're okay. You raised us that we're independent now with your wallet.
glad you got
We're
that.
not holding it.
Right. So yeah, get that money out of there. Probably just put it in your own personal account
That's good, John.
rather than have the cash laying around.
I'm just going to note, I'll just make it an observation. He's kind of got this voice that I would identify as kind of this Mormon patriarch, almost patriarchal voice that's kind of flat and kind of monotone. And it's not, that's not my dad, but moving to Utah, I don't know, there's a strand of kind of Orthodox Mormonism in Utah, Idaho, maybe Arizona, that's got kind of that flat kind of like, go to the store, get the wallet. Like the daughter's crying and he's like, yep, it's a little bit country. I think we'll go and get the wallet and everything's going to, and it's soothing and kind of flat. I don't know. That's just
Yeah,
what
there's
there.
There's definitely a Mormon cadence
Yeah,
in the way that he speaks.
Yeah.
For sure.
that's a great
Yeah.
way to.
The way I explain it again to the serial Aslee's producer that's sitting next to me, because she's asking questions, she's asking our Mormon questions. I'm like, I in my opinion, this voice is absolutely Mormon, and I think it comes from, as I explain it, like you don't walk into a Mormon ward, a very bombastic, loud guy, and think that you're going to be the most loved dude in the room. Maybe in some cultures, but not in Mormonism. They value men who are meek and humble and rule with a soft voice. And I do think it's cultural. And I think that because that's what's valued, when you have someone that might, for example, be a personality disorder or narcissistic, you're going to get less bombastic and more covert in the LDS faith, because those are the people that really shine in their wards and their neighborhoods and villages, and people trust them and think they're men of God. And that's why you see the same voice with Warren Jeffs and Chad Daybell. They're not the loud, booming preacher voices. There's a different value system when it comes to Mormonism, and it's not. Anyway, those are my thoughts.
Yeah, we're getting a lot of good comments coming in. I'll just read a few of them. So Fun to Ski writes, "Stay sweet," and that's a reference to Warren Jeffs and the way he used to sort of in a monotone, drony voice keep his polygamous wives under control. I think he had "Stay sweet" written on his shoes, and he put his shoes up on the desk, and they would say "Stay sweet," and that's how he would keep his polygamous wives in line if they were complaining. Somebody is saying that Kevin Frake's voice is similar. I'm not sure if that's true. That's just what someone believes. Scrambled Egg writes, "It's hypnotic." Somebody makes the joke, instead of monotone, that Kelly J writes, "It's Mormon tone." I don't think I have a voice like that. I feel very Mormon. So I'll say I don't think everyone's that way. Xanax voice, flat affect. Honey Bee writes, "I live in Utah, and I definitely agree with John. That Mormon voice is undeniable." And again, we've got to vote for Warren Jeff's voice.
You might not have that voice completely, but here's my but. But you were also not aiming or eyeing maybe a climb in leadership, or putting all of your stock in. I mean, maybe you were. Correct me if I'm wrong. Putting all your stock in maybe moving up the ranks, or really trying to highlight that you were the best Mormon dude out there. But there are some cultural things I think I see with you, John, too, where you, you're very understanding, you're listening. I really think, I am married to a non-Mormon man who grew up in Chicago. So everything's new to him. Okay. So maybe that's where I'm coming from. And I grew up with 4 brothers, and
So SL Conley writes, "You have hints, John."
You do have hints. You do. You do.
I called out. Oh, it's good.
You do.
Correct.
You don't
That's
have the
correct.
general conference voice, but again, you're not trying to talk like you're listening to the spirit and you're the most righteous person in the room. And if you are that guy and you're trying to really be a gatherer of the 144,000, you're not going to do that again with an iron fist. The iron fist is hidden under the covert, soft-spoken voice. But again, you don't walk into a Mormon ward with a loud, booming voice and think you're going to, it's reverence. It's about reverence and meekness and humility. That is the culture. It's not the loud preacher and the rock music. It's soft hymns, and that's Mormonism. And there's a scripture in the Doctrine and Covenants. Yes, women are, put on a pedestal, and men are told that if you are not meek and humble, and amen to the priesthood and the authority of that man, and that's their threat. So get in line and use your general conference voice if you want to move up the ranks.
Yeah.
There's my
And
tip for all you Mormon men listening.
There's no loud laughter allowed. And I actually had a bishop, he was one of my favorite bishops for a long time, who was that loud, boisterous personality. And he got told pretty often by his higher ups that he needed to calm that down.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there is, the temple denunciation of loud laughter and evil speaking, the Lord's anointed. Ali, who says, John, I bet if you started praying, you'd fall into meek Mormon man voice. That's probably true. And I will say, I was, my dad's from Salt Lake and my mom's from Idaho. So it's got to be in there. So I'll own it.
My grandpa was a bishop in Pocatello, Idaho, and he had that soft-spoken voice. I loved it. It felt comforting to me too, I have to say, so, but it's a thing. It's definitely a thing.
People do tell me that sometimes they listen to Mormon stories to help them fall asleep. So
there you go.
Yeah. I try not to feel offended by that. All right, let's go ahead and jump to the next slide. This has been fun. Now I feel self-conscious about my voice, and let's play the next clip. This is the introduction to the patriarchal blessing Chad gave to Alex, and the prosecution's detective is on the stand. So let's roll it.
You listened to that blessing at some point.
I did.
And do you know who was giving the blessing?
Chad Daybell,
Do you know who he was giving the blessing to?
Alex Cox.
Are you familiar with what faith the patriarchal blessings are attached to?
I am.
And what faith is that?
With the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It's a stake patriarch that gives that blessing.
So it's a specific calling someone has within the LDS faith to be able to give those blessings to another person.
Yes, it is.
And Chad did not hold that calling.
My understanding, he did not.
Chad Daybell, it is November 24th, 2019, it's Sunday afternoon, 5:15 p.m. We're going to give Alex Lamar Cox a patriarchal blessing.
Alexander Lamar.
Alexander Lamar Cox. On this special day, I lay my hands upon your head to give you a patriarchal blessing. As part of the member of the Church of the Firstborn that you have earned the privilege to be a member of. I do so by the power of the Melchizedek priesthood which I hold, and in the name of Jesus Christ, our Savior, who has authorized this blessing. It is grateful that you're receiving it as you move forward in your life. You are a member of the House of Israel, of the 12 tribes, and you are a descendant of Joseph through the tribe of Ephraim, which grants you many blessings, particularly of spreading the gospel in these latter days and protecting and preserving those who seek to learn the truth. And that has been your mission on this earth, and it will now expand into ways that we will discuss further in the blessing.
All right. I'm just going to really quickly say that it appears that what the prosecutor wants to do, tell me if I'm wrong, or the witness is basically trying to say, oh, no, patriarchal blessings are only done by a patriarch. So this is fringe, weird, non-approved, unorthodox Mormon stuff. Is that right? Is that what the witness is trying to say?
More specific than that. They're trying to show that Chad, again, he is the leader of this crew, giving direction through blessings.
Yeah.
Don't you feel like that, Megan? It's more than just saying this is or isn't church. They certainly shared that like Chad wasn't a patriarch and he's giving this what looks to be a patriarchal blessing, but I think they're trying to show that he was kind of calling the shots through spiritual manipulation. Megan?
Yeah, that sounds right to me for sure. This is the prosecution's exhibit, and the witness on the stand is the one who prepared the report that includes the patriarchal blessing. So they're questioning him about it. Yeah.
And the witness on the stand right now is a law enforcement from Arizona who was actually born and raised in the church for 18 years, but left when he was 18. So that's the witness.
And just my quick reaction is that while it's absolutely true that an Orthodox LDS church member or Mormon would never be giving a patriarchal blessing unless they were specifically given the call to be a patriarch. and there's only one of those in every, let's just say in 1,000 or more active Mormons, there's one patriarch. So it's a relatively rare calling. What Mormons do all the time, active faithful Mormon men specifically who have the priesthood, is they'll give priesthood blessings or father's blessings, where they absolutely would give an identical blessing, in the sense of the types of things they say, the voice they use, the hands on the head, the priesthood channeling of the Holy Ghost, and the channeling of what God supposedly is saying. That happens all the time. My dad did it to me. I did it to my kids. Every single, almost every Mormon kid in the U.S. before they go off to high school or college gets a father's blessing from their dad if he's active and faithful. And if a kid's sick, they'll get that blessing with the hands on the head, the priesthood blessing. So it's a step two away in the sense that it wasn't authorized. But then again, if Chad has been taught to feel that if the Holy Ghost tells him it's okay, and that's his feelings, it's okay, then what allows it is that he just believes he's following the Holy Ghost because those thoughts and feelings come into his mind. So it's only a step or two away. That's my argument. And y'all can disagree with me, or if you have different views, I want to hear it.
Oh, no. Yeah. Here's a secret. I'll tell a secret. Only Mindy Caldwell knew this. So last year I was sitting at the Lori Vallow trial with Mindy Caldwell, who often hosts these Daybell episodes with us. And
Hi, Mindy.
hey, Mindy. And we were sitting next to each other and they played this blessing. And it was the first time anyone had heard it. We had read it in some evidence dumps, but never heard it. We didn't know they had a recording until this moment. And it's over 20 minutes when they play it in court. And it was absolutely chilling. It took my breath away because it did sound so authentic, like a blessing you would hear in church. And so I was totally immersed in it, feeling it, chills to my bone, like frightened. Like I'm not like thinking it was sweet. I was just like, I can't believe this. I feel sick. It was like this moment of realization, thinking Chad really believes this. I was just feeling every feeling. And then Chad says, in the name of Jesus Christ, after 20 minutes, Chad says, in the name of Jesus Christ, amen. And what did I do? I said, amen in the entire courtroom. And everybody turned around and looked at me, and I was mortified. I was like, I can't believe I just said that. Because it was just such a natural response to hearing this. And I wasn't even thinking it was happy or good, but I was just so into it. And everybody turned like, who just said amen? And some people might be like, I knew I heard that. I was just grateful it didn't get picked up on the microphone. But that's just how authentic it sounds that I said amen.
Yeah, and true believing Mormons will say that, Chad is being blasphemous here because he does not hold the office of a patriarch. He has not been ordained to be a patriarch. And that's a special calling, a special designation that, you're given so that you have the special power to give patriarchal blessings to people. And the patriarchal blessing is supposed to be a guide for your life. It tells you sometimes, what your profession might be, or it hints at it, or it tells you whether or not you're going to have kids, and it tells you whether or not you're going to have struggles in your life or things like that. And it's this crazy thing because a lot of people make decisions, major life decisions, based on what is in those patriarchal blessings. And so it can be, depending on who you get as your patriarch. But it's also really interesting that they have a lot of similarities to them. And you're not supposed to share your patriarchal blessing with anyone. They're supposed to be very private and very personal. You're supposed to just keep them to yourselves, and you're not supposed to really talk about them. Well, what we find out when people start talking about them is how similar they are.
Yeah. The only other thing I'll add is that I think about my faithful sister who's got an active faithful priesthood holding husband. Whenever she's having a really bad time in her life or really needs guidance or insight, she'll ask her husband to give her a priesthood blessing. He'll lay his hands on her head and he'll sound exactly like Chad sounds and tell her prophetic things, tell her what she ought to consider, maybe even point her in a certain direction, maybe even tell her what she should do. And I don't think my sister's alone. My sister's a very Orthodox and even somewhat progressive Mormon, I think, in many ways.
Mhm.
So that felt very familiar to me. He just shouldn't have called it a patriarchal blessing.
Right. Yeah. The other thing I just want to ask Lauren, do you remember the date of the welfare check on JJ?
It was right before Thanksgiving because then they raided the apartment right after, and that was Thanksgiving
So
weekend.
I'm trying to remember if it was November 24th or November 26th, because the date of this patriarchal blessing is November 24th. And go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I spoke to Larry shortly after this was brought out in Lori's trial. And his comment to me was that patriarchal blessing was that man's last rites.
Yeah, well, let's point this out too. Thank you for bringing that up. That could have been done the moment that they did the welfare check and Chad had an oh shit moment. Excuse me, but I mean, he wouldn't call it that. Chad had a oh no, what does the spirit want from me now moment. And
a fetch moment.
yeah. And so they knew that they were gonna Chad and Lori were probably taken off to Hawaii. Because that's what they did before they came and raided the townhouse with search warrants right after the welfare check. And then I want to point out that 2 weeks after this blessing, it was December 13th, I believe. Correct me if I'm a day or two wrong. Alex died on December 12th, right?
Yes, Tammy was exhumed. Tammy's body was exhumed on December 11th, and Alex died on December 12th.
Okay, so take away my December 13th date. So December 11th is when Tammy Daybell's body is exhumed. So just a couple weeks after this blessing. And then Alex, the very next morning, calls Chad and Lori in Hawaii, receives a blessing from Chad over the phone, and then he dies. The day after Tammy Daybell's body is exhumed, which was essentially the beginning of a massive investigation across states, was they exhumed Tammy Daybell's body. Wouldn't you say, like when they really amped up and were about to share with the world that 2 children were missing?
Yeah, and it's in the patriarchal blessing, Chad tells Alex that you have already given us service that is invaluable, and then basically tells him that you'll know when it's time to go to the other side.
Correct. Yeah, and that is the most important part of that blessing is, thank you for saying that, Megan, is Chad Daybell says to Alex, and he talks about his entire future and marriage, just like a patriarchal blessing would, and his future and who he's going to save and now and the hereafter. But he says, you're going to know when it's your time to go to the other side. 2 weeks later, I guess he knew.
Yep.
All right. Thanks, y'all. The next slide is sort of titled Prosecution Interrogating Investigator or Detective about Patriarchal Blessing and Church of the Firstborn. So this is the introduction of this teaching or belief of Chad and Lori's about the Church of the Firstborn. And then after this, we'll talk about whether that is in any way a Mormon doctrine or a fringe Mormon doctrine. So let's roll the tape.
Detective Duncan, when you listened to that, could you hear a female also?
Yes.
Do you know who that female was?
That's-
I'm going to object without some proper foundation.
Sustain.
Based on your investigation, did you ever hear the voices of any other individuals involved in this case?
Yes, I did.
Did you ever hear the voice of Lori Vallow?
Yes, I did.
Do you know, based on that, did you recognize the female voice within that blessing?
I believe that voice to be Lori Vallow.
In that blessing, were there certain things that stood out to you?
There was a lot. First off, the date, November 24th, that is spoken, 2019 by Chad. And the other thing that stood out was at the beginning when he mentions that Alex is part of the Church of the Firstborn. That stood out to me. And then third, is in there talking about how he had already helped us more than they could repay him.
And breaking that down a little bit, with regard to the Church of the Firstborn, is that affiliated with the LDS faith to the best of your knowledge?
Judge, I'm going to object unless there's some foundation.
Sustain.
And Your Honor, if I may respond.
Go ahead.
I'm happy to lay more foundation, but I think I've already asked this officer previously on a similar objection if he looked into the LDS faith and is familiar with some of the terms used. So I think we have laid foundation for purposes of the investigation.
Judge, that's a pretty broad statement.
Well, if you'll re-ask the question, I thought you were talking about a different church. So go ahead.
Through the investigation, and are you familiar with whether or not the Church of the Firstborn is affiliated with the LDS Church?
It's my understanding that the two are not affiliated.
Is that why it caught your attention?
Yes.
All right. Any y'all want to give context of what you know about the Church of the Firstborn and what the heck they're talking about here?
Well, I do have some thoughts on the Church of the Firstborn, that in particular. I served my mission in Kirtland, Ohio. It's a church history, and the Doctrine and Covenants, majority of the Doctrine and Covenants is written in Kirtland, Ohio. I've actually oddly read the Doctrine and Covenants more than the Book of Mormon. I think it's kind of interesting. It's just because it's like written in the 1800s. And the Church of the Firstborn is written about a lot in the Doctrine and Covenants as Christ's church. What I was taught about it or understood that in essentially heaven, that you're not going to really need an earthly church anymore, and everyone will be part of the Church of the Firstborn, meaning everyone would be part of Christ's church. Christ is the firstborn. That's how I had always taken it personally until this Chad and Lori Daybell case. So there's my personal experience with it. It was something that actually, I had actually studied and thought about. And it to me was, one day there won't really be any churches. We'll just be part of Christ's church. That's what I thought it meant in the Doctrine and Covenants.
All right. Megan, anything you want to add about Church of the Firstborn? Then I'll add a couple things.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, this was kind of an aha moment for me when I heard this in the last trial, because I realized that this was kind of what Chad is calling his church. And I know that it has, some Mormon connotations, of course, but when I heard it in the patriarchal blessing, I was like, oh crap, it's a whole church. Like, there are more people like this out here. This is not just a little group of cult members. Like, there are other people. He's trying to form his own church. And it was just kind of shocking for me. I know that doesn't have to do with the Mormon theology of it, but.
Okay. And then what I wanted to do as well is just share a few just references. So the first that Gerardo prepared for us, heaven bless Gerardo, we have here just a screenshot from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints website. I'm 100% certain that Gerardo screenshotted this today. And here are several references to Church of the Firstborn. It says celestial heirs are Church of the Firstborn, and it's quoting Mormon scripture, Doctrine and Covenants 76. And it says celestial heirs will not be caught up to Church of the Firstborn. That is also in DNC 76. And then it says, as many come will be brought to Church of Firstborn. That's Doctrine and Covenants section 77. And then 78 says, ye are Church of Firstborn. So that's three different sections in the Doctrine and Covenants, which is Mormon scripture. And then a fourth is Doctrine and Covenants 88, where it says celestial glory is glory of Church of Firstborn. And section 93 is those who are begotten through Christ are Church of Firstborn. If I'm 5 or 6 now sections. And then section 107 says priesthood to commune with Church of Firstborn. So I mean, that's like 7 or 8 references in core Mormon scripture. So I think it's going to be hard for people to argue that teaching is fringe. It's clear that that's core Mormon doctrine if it's in Doctrine and Covenants. And by the way, according to Mormon doctrine, Jesus himself revealed the Doctrine and Covenants to Joseph Smith. So those are Jesus's words, according to Mormon belief. So I think that's worth sharing. And then just for fun, I saw someone reference Joseph Fielding Smith's Doctrines of Salvation. Joseph Fielding Smith was not only Mormon church historian for many decades, he was one of the prophets, seers, and revelators for the Mormon church. And he was viewed as one of the key scriptorians of Mormonism. And his books, Doctrines of Salvation, volumes 1, 2, and 3, were available when I was a missionary. I was allowed to read them as a missionary. I did read them multiple times as a missionary in English and Spanish. And so this is absolutely approved Mormon stuff. And so I just have a full text version of just volume 2 of Joseph Fielding Smith's Doctrines of Salvation. And if I type in Church of the Firstborn, there are 10 references just in volume 2 of Joseph Fielding Smith's Doctrines of Salvation. And I'll just read from it. There's a section on page, I think, 246, called the Church of the Firstborn, and it says, exalted beings belong to Church of Firstborn. Those who gain exaltation in the celestial kingdom are those who are members of the Church of the Firstborn. In other words, those who keep all the commandments of the Lord. There will be many who are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints who shall never become members of the Church of the Firstborn. It talks about the higher ordinances in the temple of God pertaining to exaltation to be required to be in the Church of the Firstborn. And then it goes on to say, obedience to the laws and the ordinances and the covenants required of those who desire to become members of the Church of the Firstborn, as these are administered in the house of the Lord. And then how to join the first Church of the Firstborn. Joseph Fielding Smith writes, the Lord has made it possible for us to become members of the Church of the Firstborn by receiving the blessings of the house of the Lord and overcoming all things. Thus we become heirs, priests and kings who have received of his fullness and of his glory, who shall dwell in the presence of God and his Christ forever and ever with full exaltation. Priests and kings, and probably priestesses and queens. I don't know. Does any of that language resonate with the Chad and Lori and sort of Mormon proper?
All of it.
Really?
To give, all of it. This is exactly where they got it, which is what I think we're pointing out. But I want to clarify, because again, I don't want to give Chad Daybell a pass and say this is what every, Chad Daybell, believes in Mormons all believe in a veil, but only Chad Daybell somehow Chad Daybell thinks that he could go in for brain surgery at a hospital and the doctor would open up his brain and find a veil that he could maybe stitch. He's so literal, is my point. So I want to point out that, take me as an example, 25 years ago, I saw the Church of the Firstborn as like heaven. Chad Daybell is reading the exact same thing, which makes complete sense. This is exactly how he lays it out for Lori. Exactly, that they're going to be kings and queens. But he sends Lori an email with 7 missions on it and says that it is our duty to establish this literal Church of the Firstborn. I guess I just don't want to give a cult leader any escape here. He also created a system himself where people believed him, and he, did things with this that most would never do.
Yeah.
But it's absolutely Mormon theology. But not all Mormons can be like, oh, I met a hot girl who was Mrs. Texas. I'm going to write her and say, by the way, it's our duty you're going to be my queen and my heiress to the Church of the Firstborn. And it's our duty to start this church before the call out. I just don't want to give him a pass, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah. And while Chad takes it to 11 or 12 or 13 or 20, the Mormon Church also, I think part of what we all feel very passionate about is that there are all these weird, twisted doctrines or theologies or obscure doctrines or theologies that either Joseph Smith said or Brigham Young said, or they're in the Journal of Discourses, or Bruce R. McConkie said it, Mormon Doctrine, or Cleon Skousen, or Joseph Fielding Smith, or Visions of Glory, or they're in the scriptures. Take your pick. What the Mormon Church could absolutely do is like clarify it and say, No such thing as zombies. Visions of Glory is a bad book. Tom, what's his last name? I'm spacing.
Harrison.
What? Harrison, Tom Harrison, you're excommunicated. Like, stop this garbage about Church of the Firstborn. It's all made up. Like, they could go to a general conference where they speak to literally all the members in the world twice a year, and they could just shut this crap down. And I just restrained my swearing. They could cut this all down in a single general conference if they wanted to, but they allow this stuff to continue years and years and even decades beyond where the cat gets out of the bag. That's my opinion.
And can I just share this, a comment? I saw Rabbit is saying hidden true crime t-shirts and other Church of the Firstborn merchandise now for sale. Use promo code Chad for 10% off. That's fake, but you better believe that I'm going to have some Church of the Firstborn merch ready for you guys next week. I'll get it's done. We also hit 144,000 subscribers this week.
That's
and
awesome.
I thought, how ironic. Take that, Chad. Take that. Sorry. May
you double or triple that. Megan, any final words before we go on to the next slide?
Yeah, it's all just super troubling to me because there's blurred lines between both things, and it's so easy to see where Chad and Lori sort of formulated these things and then took it off into the direction that suited them, because they're just in this confirmation bias loop of thinking that God is telling them things, and it's conveniently exactly what they want to hear. So it's just super disturbing to me. It's all rooted in this Mormon doctrine, but also, like you were saying, Lauren, Chad took it to the direction that he really wanted to go with it, which was, just to whatever it was Lori wanted, that's how he, tailored it to suit her, but, certainly had these beliefs in place before she ever came around, and I don't think I'm spoiling anything by saying that he also had a pendulum, a little owl necklace that he, would dangle, and depending on which way it went, was whatever prediction that he would make and come out. And so that's kind of like his version of a seer stone,
Right.
Really quickly, I'm going to kind of do a little bit of a public service announcement, but for the benefit, I think, of all of us. Gerardo wanted me to mention that we have a really good episode on Mormon Stories podcast in our LDS discussion series about Mormon patriarchal blessings. I think most believing Mormons would really benefit from watching this episode and listening to it. I think Never Mormons would also very much value and enjoy it. We've got a series on our YouTube channel called LDS Discussions. It's like 53 or 54 episodes now, where we tackle Mormon church truth claims from start to finish, from Joseph Smith and his treasure digging, Peepstone in the Hat, Book of Mormon translation, all the way through to modern things like racism and skin of blackness and Mormon patriarchal blessings. I do want to encourage our hidden true crime and what is your new YouTube channel called, Megan?
The YouTube channel is Third Verse.
Our Third Verse and hidden true crime viewers, feel free to subscribe to the Mormon Stories podcast channel and check out these episodes, only because we think you'll really benefit from it. And I'm also going to say, Mormon Stories podcast viewers and listeners, please go subscribe to Lauren and Megan's channel, because we all share great content that I think cross-pollinates well with each other's audiences. And it was Gerardo that asked me to do that public service announcement. And you know what? I do it basically whatever Gerardo says. That's just the way I roll, and that served me very well. Okay, so let's go ahead and go to the next slide. I believe in the next slide, the prosecution is interrogating the detective about patriarchal blessings. Prosecution insinuates that Chad suspiciously predicted Alex's death. Anything y'all want to say before I play this clip?
Nope, go for it.
All right.
I will say, I couldn't put in a plug for the LDS discussion series. I found that series incredibly helpful. It was instrumental in helping me to sort of get to the place where I understood what was the real, what I was taught, as compared to also what was the true history that I hadn't known before. And so that was incredibly helpful to me. So thank you guys for doing that.
Our pleasure. Yeah, thank you. It's a great work, and Mike from LDS Discussions is a gem. All right, let's go ahead and play this next clip.
Then you talked about a statement in there that the statement was made, already assisted us in ways that can never be repaid.
Correct.
And again, Chad was giving the blessing,
Correct.
and it's your belief Lori was also present for the blessing.
Yes.
And then circling back, you said one of the other things that stood out to you was the date, November 24th of 2019.
Yes.
Do you know if Alex Cox is still alive?
Alex Cox is still alive during that time. Yes.
And do you know when he passed away?
December of 2019.
So just shortly after this.
Yes.
In the blessing, did you also hear reference made, you will know when it's time to move to the other side?
I did.
And that's Chad telling that to Alex.
Correct.
On November 24th of 2019, were Tylee and JJ missing?
Yes, they were.
And on November 24th of 2019, was Charles Vallow dead?
Yes.
And on November 24th of 2019, was Tammy Daybell dead?
Yes.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
All right, Lauren, what do you make of that clip? And go ahead and unmute yourself.
I think she's making their point. I mean, we had to listen to that painful 20-minute monotone general conference voice. And so I think she's just digging in and saying, what took your attention? It's the fact that he suggested that Alex would know when to leave this earth. And what else was it? The 3 points just were driven home, that they were all present. They all knew, and Chad Daybell was in charge.
Megan, you want to add anything?
Yeah, just that, you know, that they did bring up those points that at this time, you know, all three of them were together. Alex died just 2 weeks later. The children had already been killed and Tammy was already dead. So, you know, that kind of just sums it up, that this was, you know, Alex being given a pass to move on, and Chad was the one who was in control of telling him what to do.
And then I'll just say this idea of, you know, you will know when it's time to pass on to the other side. I mean, that's the slippery slope of telling people that when they give a priesthood blessing, they communicate with God. And it's not just patriarchs in Mormonism that are taught this. When a bishop gives a bishop's blessing, he is supposedly channeling God's voice and will, or the Savior's. When a father gives a father's blessing, or a husband gives a husband's blessing, or just a home teacher in Mormonism gives a home teacher blessing. It doesn't matter if a freaking elders quorum president in a BYU Idaho ward gives a priesthood blessing to a co-ed, is that a wrong term, to a young woman at BYU Idaho. He's channeling God and Jesus. And so, yes, it's creepy and disturbing and chilling to have Chad, you know, be telling Alex that he'll know when it's his time to pass away, as if he's basically saying, maybe it'll be time to end your own life soon. That's what happens, I believe. That's a logical next step for some people when they're taught that they have the power just by virtue of what thought or feeling comes into their brain. Not only do they have the power to discern God and Jesus's will, but they have the authority to tell other people what God and Jesus's will is for them, because that's what you get when you get the Mormon priesthood. And I don't think I'm too far off with that.
No, I agree with you absolutely on that. I actually want to say I feel strongly about that. It is a slippery slope when you give someone that sort of power. As you point out, even, you know, a man blessing a woman and they're both single, and what the male is able to then tell the female. And I'm using that very specific example because I will say that I have shared on my channel that multiple mortal probations aren't a thing, and we mock Chad's pickup line to Lori that they were married in a past life because it's so hilarious. And for those that wonder, I do read comments, and someone made a solid point in comments, and I want to share it. And she said, well, because Mormon theology includes the premortal existence, that's technically like a past life. What's the difference between a man telling a woman, I knew you in the pre-existence, and, I believe that we're meant or destined to be together. And I guess I want to reiterate that blessings, and a man being able to tell a woman something like that, it is a very slippery slope, and it's something that opens up to spiritual and religious manipulation and abuse. So I just want to say, yes, I agree. And it's exactly what we see happening in this situation, just on a more extreme level.
And so what the Mormon Church could do is just tell people, all members, you don't speak for God or Jesus. Nobody does, or at least none of you do. And you're not allowed, whenever you lay your hands on someone's head, you're not allowed to speak as if you know what God or Jesus wants for them. So stop doing it. But I don't think the church can realistically do that. Megan, did you want to add anything?
Actually, I think the church could realistically do that, because that is a core teaching of the church, that no person has the right to tell the general membership of the church, right, what God is speaking for them. It's the prophet that's supposed to give direction for the general church. But again, I agree with you, John, because they do tell you that, as the patriarch or the man of the home, that you do have the right to receive revelation for your own family and for the people that you're in charge of. And here's the other super, super disturbing thing, is that before Stacy died, and Stacy is Lori and Alex's older sister, and she passed away under very suspicious circumstances. I was actually there with Alex when this happened. And the talk around the family at the time was that she was kind of told it was her time. And I imagine that Barry probably gave her a very similar blessing to what we're hearing Chad give Alex at this time. And that idea of like, maybe it's your time to go. Well, that could have very well have come from from Lori and Alex talking about Stacy's death.
Yeah, good point. Anything else, Lauren, before we go to the next slide?
We're good.
All right. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. Thanks for that, Megan and Lauren. This is John Pryor questioning the detective, asked to call him detective. He seems excited to bring this points, and the judge has some feedback here.
Done that twice. Not on purpose. May I refer to you as officer? Is that okay?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, thank you, officer. So you made mention of the fact that you familiarized yourself with the LDS faith. Is that right?
I was born and raised in the LDS faith, yes.
Okay, so maybe you can enlighten me, because this has been a learning experience for me.
It has me as well.
Okay, but you're obviously have a hand up, is that you were at least part of that faith for a while. I don't have that. So you're familiar with the term Doctrine of Covenants?
Yes.
Okay, and in the Doctrine of Covenants, it talks about the Church of the Firstborn as part of the LDS faith. You remember that?
Well, I can't speak to the Doctrine of Covenants. I know what the Doctrine of Covenants are, but
well, you spoke to the Doctrine of Covenants, though.
That I know what they are, yes.
Well,
I don't understand content.
We're already having an issue with you talking at the same time as Mr. Pryor and vice versa. So please question and answer and don't talk over each other.
And Your Honor, I'm going to object as beyond the scope.
Overruled at this point.
Okay, so those are some interesting dynamics. Lauren, what did you observe there, having been in the room?
Yeah, I was watching that. I just thought to myself, wow, John Pryor really wishes John DeLynn was on the stand. But this is what I mean. I was texting you at one point. I texted you and Gerardo, and I'm like, dude, you guys, you guys got to cover this, because this is when was the last time we saw in a capital murder case at a trial the Doctrine and Covenants being argued and televised on a stand. Like this is, to me, this is just epic. And, and I want to go back to the church saying from the very beginning, they have said these people have nothing to do with us. And now we are in a nationally televised trial internationally, watching people argue temple attendance in Doctrine and Covenants scriptures. So I think what this says is this trial is certainly about Mormonism and about belief. And maybe we can even take it more broadly. It is about belief and it is about cults, but it is something that I do believe strongly that LDS members and anyone that considers themselves Mormon in any way, whether that's anti-Jack, active, TB, whatever we call it, anyone should be listening to this because this is part of Mormonism, this case. And if you want any more proof, here you go. This was this week in court.
I love John Pryor's approach. He's like, maybe you can enlighten me. It reminds me of Phil Hartman's Unfrozen Dead Caveman Lawyer. My primitive caveman mind just can't comprehend, as a lawyer, just kind of that inform me, enlighten me. Like he's kind of pleasantly laying a trap, for the right. Megan, what did you think?
No, I agree. It's exactly that tactic because he, even in his opening statements, he made mention of Chad serving, I don't know, something called this mission thing. I don't know exactly what it is, pretending like he didn't really know what it was when you know very well that John Pryor had to have studied a lot about the church. He knows exactly what a mission is. He knows exactly what the Doctrine and Covenants is. And he's like, I don't know. I'm an idiot. Maybe you tell me. What do you think?
Although he did call him Doctrine of Covenants. And I was like, wait a minute. I don't know if that was intentional or not.
And later on, he says parochial blessing instead of patriarchal. I think it's on purpose. I think he's doing it on purpose to make people think, I don't really know about this stuff. It's kind of weird.
That's interesting. That'd be interesting to find out if he's doing that on purpose. What did y'all think of the prosecuting attorney objecting and saying the line of questioning was beyond the scope? Lauren, what'd you think of that?
Well, John Pryor's defense very much, and this is all days, is trying to set a narrative with his questions. So John Pryor has gone beyond the scope several times. And what is this? Like, let me explain. So we start right now, it's the prosecution's turn. So the prosecution is on direct. They're calling their witnesses. And they have their purpose and their reason for every witness. And it's laid out in the evidence that they have and the evidence that's been gathered and what they're able to do. So they're sharing the evidence. John Pryor then gets to get up for cross-examination of the prosecution's witness, cross. And during his cross, you actually nailed it. This is what John Pryor tries to do, is ask questions that actually set a narrative. Like, so anyway, the kids were found out by the pasture, and he's setting this narrative. There's farmland. He's doing this with the religion too. So, okay, so you know about the church. You were in it until you're 18, so you clearly know about the Doctrine and Covenants, and it mentions Church of the Firstborn. So he's setting this narrative of Chad Daybell's beliefs were just regular LDS doctrine without asking it. So is he going beyond the scope? Yes. I don't know if that's a bad thing or a wrong thing. What's happening in court is John Pryor is often going beyond the scope of what the prosecution asked their witnesses, but Judge Boyce is allowing redirect. So the prosecution gets to get back up again and redirect with how he went out of the scope, which means he has thrown religion into the scope, and then we get recross. So I do believe that he went beyond the scope. If that's your question, they weren't wanting to ask this witness. The prosecution did not call this witness to give scripture about the Doctrine and Covenants, but John Pryor was able to get there with his words. Thus, he went beyond the scope. I think that is absolutely fair for the judge to say he did go beyond scope, but they were able to do recross and redirect.
All right. Anything, Megan, before we move on to the next slide?
Yeah, just briefly, they're trying to, John Pryor is trying to get the witness to, talk about the doctrine of the church. And then later on, he's going to try to say, well, you're not really an expert. So what do you know, kind of thing. So he's setting him up to fail here.
All right. Okay, well, let's go ahead and go to the next clip. And this has to do with John Pryor, possibly, some say, challenging the credibility of the prosecution's witness or detective. And y'all could judge for yourself if you think the prosecution's witness/detective looks bad when he admits that the way he investigated this was by talking to other members of the church. All right. That's kind of just a few things to listen for or watch for.
Miss Blake talked to you about the Church of the First, and you said that it wasn't part of the LDS faith. Is that right?
My understanding that the two were separate is what I said.
Okay. But the Doctrine of the Covenants talks about the Church of the Firstborn as part of the LDS faith. So where did you get your information from?
Basically, I had talked to other investigators that were part of the LDS Church, and we had heard through this investigation earlier the mention of the Church of the Firstborn,
Okay.
not understanding what.
So you really don't know whether it's part of the LDS faith or not, the Doctrine of Covenants, even though the Doctrine of Covenants discusses Church of the Firstborn being part of it, right?
Yeah, so like I said, other than I don't, based on my knowledge, yes.
Now, and I'm going to go off topic a little bit, but some of the other stuff that I saw, Zaluma Pastena is talking about light and dark.
Correct.
And light and dark is part of the LDS faith too, right?
I have no idea.
Okay. Well, you said you familiarized yourself with it. Did you familiarize yourself with light and dark?
Not totally, no.
What about death and death percentages and things like that? Is that part of the LDS faith?
I've never heard that.
Okay, but you don't know whether it is or not, right?
Correct.
All right. Again, Lauren, you were in the room. What'd you think about that exchange?
I mean, he's really pushing it. Okay, so here's something that I want everyone to take into perspective too. John Pryor really doesn't know much about the LDS faith, and he's defending Chad Daybell, and he's known Chad Daybell for years and years now, because he's been defending him we're on almost 5 years now since the murders. So I am certain that Chad Daybell is also pointing out to John Pryor that all these things are LDS beliefs. I do believe that Chad believes this, and I do believe that Chad believes in this defense, and he's teaching John Pryor about the church. I know that wasn't your question, but I just want to put that into people's brains for a second. Can you envision this attorney relationship with this defendant, that he's saying, no, he's bringing him literature, and he's saying, no, this is in the church, this is in the church, and this is in the church. And so he comes up and he's asking about death percentages. I have never heard of death percentages, but I want to know, what does he have up his sleeve? I'm like really curious, because I feel like they're talking and Chad's teaching him with history books and all this stuff. So I'm like, what has Chad told him about death percentages? I almost want to be like, let him loose and be like, keep going. I want to know, what is Chad telling you? Go on. Where is he getting this information? Because this is clearly, in my opinion, Chad Daybell's defense. It's not just John Pryor's defense. I think Chad Daybell is really believing in his defense, that these are church teachings, and everything he's teaching these people he learned in Sunday school. And so John Pryor is taking that, and I just, in some ways, I wonder I don't think John Pryor's gotten as far as he thought he was going to get with this, because a lot of people are just like, I'm lost. I don't know what you're talking about. But he clearly is, Chad Daybell clearly believes in this, and he's saying, look, this is this. I want to know now where in the history books death percentages are, because I think that John Pryor knows something.
John Doman makes the comment, a Mormon advisor might help him. In other words, this person that was picked by the prosecutor to speak as an expert to Mormonism, at least according to John Doman, is not doing a great job representing Mormonism. Like you said, they could have found an expert. Maybe the prosecutor never reached out to me. Maybe I would have had second thoughts about actually participating if the prosecutor had reached out to me. Gerardo is phoning in through text, and he says that we may be missing that Pryor wanted to impeach the witness and show that he's not an expert and can't really be trusted. That's
a big moment.
That's Gerardo's point of view. Megan, let's give you a chance to weigh in here.
Yeah, I'll just point out that this person was not called to be an expert in Mormonism. They were called to, sort of give some of the timeline and some of the events and things like that, if I recall correctly. But yes, I think that's what John Pryor is trying to do. He's trying to say, you made some comments when the prosecutors asked you questions. You made some comments about Mormonism, and now you're saying you don't really know for sure, and you had to talk to other officers to get your information. So John Pryor is trying to impeach his credibility and say what you told the prosecution, your further test or your earlier testimony is not valid.
Yeah. Really quickly, I want to. Oh, Lauren, were you going to say
I was
something?
going to say, if we're missing that clip, whenever you get to, I can kind of relay what happened because it is kind of a big deal. If you are truly missing it, I can kind of take people through it because it was quite the moment in court.
Okay. Let me ask you a question. Maybe Gerardo can text me and tell me if we've got that clip or not, or Megan can, because I'm watching these all for the first time. But can y'all explain to me one thing? Because I should have thought this through, and I don't think I fully thought it through, and I'm just being honest. So if Pryor's goal is to make Chad and Lori's beliefs seem as mainstream LDS or mainstream Mormon as possible, how does that benefit Chad?
Okay. This is how.
Help me out. Thanks, Lauren. And Megan, I want to hear your point too.
This is how, and this has actually been, I'm proud to say, the beginning of our podcast. My husband and I started our podcast, Beyond the Veil, discussing Chad. And so everybody has the background. My husband is not LDS. He's from Chicago originally, and he's a forensic and criminal psychologist. And when we started our podcast, Beyond the Veil, the first episode in June of 2020, the month that the children's bodies were found, we sat down in our living room and I said, okay, I want to talk about Lori Vallow. Help us understand a woman who could kill her children. And he said, before we talk about Lori, we have to talk about Chad, because this is Chad Daybell's belief system. This is coming from Chad. Chad is the mastermind behind all of this. And in order to understand why Lori chose to do this, we have to understand her belief system. Thus, we have to understand Chad Daybell. So set the stage with that this all comes down to the possibility of a belief system. And where does this belief system stem from? John DeLynn says Mormonism. I'm going to take it a step further and say it comes from Chad Daybell. And that's why I'm always like, don't give Chad Daybell a pass, because he took these things from Mormonism and he took it to a next level, or as Eric Smith, his friend, says, the next tier, whatever you want to say. And he is the one relaying this. He is the one giving the blessings. So if John Pryor, his defense attorney, is able to say, no, this was not Chad Daybell's belief system. This is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. My client is innocent. Lori and Zulema and Melanie Gibb and all these people that followed Chad, they were just following the church's teachings. This has nothing to do with my client. Then he can get away with this. We can't prove that Chad Daybell killed anyone. We can't. But what they can prove is that he conspired and that he led the charge through a belief system. But if it's not Chad Daybell's belief system, we lose a lot of ability to see Chad Daybell as guilty.
Okay. Megan, do you want to add anything about why Pryor wants to tie Chad's beliefs to mainstream Mormonism?
Yeah, I think Lauren's absolutely right. I mean, it is. If it's not Chad's belief system that drove the light and dark percentages, and that drove the castings, and that drove the teaching that when a zombie inhabits the body, then the only way to get rid of the zombie is to kill the body. These were all Chad's teachings. And so if we try to equate all of that with mainstream Mormonism, then we can't prove any. I don't think there's any evidence that proves that Chad killed anybody. Well, maybe Tammy. I don't know if that's going to come out later. But I mean, that the belief system has to be part of all of this. Otherwise, Chad gets away with it, at least on 2 counts.
Chad is guilty because he created the light and dark scale. And when someone was dark, they were murdered. Yep. If that is a mainstream LDS belief, then Chad doesn't matter.
What do you mean?
That's why I'm always saying I don't want to give Chad Daybell a pass.
What do you mean?
We're not going to church and learning about a light and dark scale with decimal points. You know what I mean? But Chad Daybell's teaching it and sending people emails about who is light and who is dark and who is a zombie. and he's making the call about whether the casting or the exorcism is working and whether or not someone still has their evil spirit inside of them. If this is all just mainstream LDS beliefs, that I don't know how much of a case we have against Chad.
Well, help me understand that. If a church, if Charles Manson has a church that says we should kill anyone we want to, and then he kills a bunch of people, he still goes to jail for killing people. He doesn't get off because his church believes it's okay to kill people. And that's just an extreme example.
But it's not an extreme example. It's a perfect example. It was not somebody else's church. It was Charles Manson's church. And this is Chad Daybell's church. In other words, yes, they were mainstream Mormon, but if they're learning these beliefs in Sunday school, then it's the Sunday school president that's guilty. Charles Manson didn't go learn. Charles Manson wasn't getting word from somebody else what to do. Charles Manson was calling the shots.
Okay. And so let me see if I'm understanding this, that if the church is teaching toxic, harmful beliefs, then if a member harms someone under the influence of those toxic beliefs, then the church is either responsible or partially responsible for the harm that's done. Whereas if this is Chad's own homegrown church, then he's fully responsible for the harm that's done. Am I hearing that right? Or am I missing something?
No, that's fair. Yeah. And let me explain it one more way too, because a lot of crime is about who did it and blaming somebody else. You know, the Russ trial that just happened has nothing to do with Mormonism or church or anything, but you know, the Alec Baldwin film where tragically a director was killed, a filmmaker, a mother. And a lot of people are fascinated with that case because it's a whodunit case. Who should be held responsible? Is it Alec Baldwin's fault because he had a sloppy movie set? Is it the armorer's fault because that was her job to make sure there wasn't a bullet in a prop, you know, that killed this filmmaker and this mother? The whodunit is a really important part of the crime. So if John Pryor is going to take that a step further, well, who did this? If the belief system is a big part of the motive, then is the whodunit the LDS Church then? Is it the LDS Church's fault? Are they the murderers? Is President Nelson the murderer? Is Joseph Smith the murderer? If you can blame somebody else, that's the best way to get your guy off. But if it's Chad Daybell that created this belief system, if it's Chad Daybell that created the light and dark scale, if it's Chad Daybell saying who is and who isn't a zombie, which I want to say right now, he did, then you can't blame anybody else, if that's a good way to.
Okay.
And that doesn't mean that the church shouldn't be held responsible and we shouldn't be looking at these issues with saying that I knew you in the pre-existence, or I'm going to, look, since the Church of the Firstborn exists, I'm going to go start my own. That doesn't mean they aren't responsible, and we shouldn't be looking at the system, which is what Mormon Stories does, which is why this is so important to be talking about. Like, this system created this, and we should hold the system responsible. But are we going to blame the system for murder, or are we going to blame Chad Daybell for murder?
Got it. Got it. Megan, did you want to add anything?
No, I agree with Lauren, and I think it's going to be John Pryor's, it has been sort of his narrative this whole time that Chad is just a regular Mormon guy, and he got seduced by Lori, and it was Lori and Alex that actually did the killings and carried all of this stuff out, and Tammy died of natural causes.
Got it. Because I love Gerardo and he's super smarter than me, I'm going to read what he writes as well. Not that Lauren and Megan haven't fully explained it, but Gerardo writes, the answer is that the evidence against Chad is mostly circumstantial, according to Gerardo. It's his opinion. Things like weird texts and talk about zombies and light and dark. They're not literally talking about killing the kids on their text messages. So if Pryor can show that these zombie and light and dark talk, all of this is mainstream Mormonism, how can this prove that Chad killed the kids? So that's the way Gerardo's explaining it. And that's just a different point of view in addition to Lauren's and Megan's. Thanks, Gerardo.
Totally valid. Sorry. I remember in Lori's trial, that was kind of the closing statement to some of these witnesses. They were going over the text messages and they were talking about light and dark and they were talking about zombies and they were talking about castings. And the defense attorney's final cross-examination said, did any of these text messages ever say, let's kill the kids? Well, no. Did any of these text messages ever say, let's hurt the kids? No. Did any of the text messages ever say, I'm going to kill Charles? No. And so that was the narrative. They never literally said it. And so they're trying to just blame it all on, it was circumstantial and it was a belief system, but it wasn't real.
Got it. Okay, this is great. Thank you both. The great analysis, I should say. People are getting mad at me if I go, that's fantastic, good job, or I love it. If I say
Love
that
it.
and I mean your analysis, they don't
Right.
like it if it sounds like I'm saying, great, people died. Like that's
Love
not
it.
what I mean.
Awesome.
People give great feedback. Okay, let's go to slide 11. I think we may have missed this one, so let's make sure we didn't miss it. This is slide 11, where I thought we played this, but let's just make sure. If we played again, that's
Miss Blake talked to you about the Church of the First, and you said that it wasn't part of the LDS faith. Is that right?
My understanding that the two were separate is what I said.
Okay. But the Doctrine of the Covenants talks about the Church of the Firstborn as part of the LDS faith. So where did you get your information from?
Basically, I had talked to other investigators that were part of the LDS Church, and
Yeah, you're right, John.
we
We
had heard through this
already.
investigation earlier.
okay.
than mentioned.
All right.
I thought that Gerardo was saying that we missed that slide, but we were just missing the point.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Do
All
you want
right.
me to share what happened? Because it was.
Well,
Yeah, you were there. Please, Lauren.
I was going to say, let's go to the next one and see if the next one plays it, because I think that's the caption for this slide.
I
Okay.
agree.
All right. So this one, to set this up, some description is after Pryor has shown the detective doesn't know much about the LDS faith, he will now question. Let me take the view off of Lauren. He will now question him about Chad's other beliefs, trying to show that the detective can't be trusted on his expertise of what Mormons believe or don't believe. That's the analysis of this clip. Now y'all judge for yourselves.
Okay. And then we heard about some vibrations. I heard the word vibrations a couple of times. Are you familiar with that term within the LDS faith about vibrations?
I am not.
What about being possessed by spirits and praying for the removal from your body? Have you heard about that?
I have not.
Okay. But you don't know whether any of these theories are part of the LDS faith, right?
Correct.
Okay. Are you aware that in the LDS faith, that if someone is possessed, that if you pray for them, you can have them removed from their body? Are you aware of that?
I am not.
Can I just say really quickly, never in my 45 years of active faithful Mormonism did I ever hear the term zombie used in any mainstream context, not once. This concept of light and dark, as it applies to judging whether the person is full zombie or still has that spirit in there somewhere, never heard that ever in all my years. Now, of course, the light and dark that I referred to earlier, of like a darker countenance, or they're losing the spirit, you can see they're darker, the darkness in their eyes. Yes, that, but not what Chad was doing more specifically. I want to acknowledge, and I also want to acknowledge that this idea of vibrations was never part of my mainstream Mormon upbringing. Where I started hearing about vibrations is when I moved to Utah, and sort of new age crystals, like memory testing, muscle testing, Reiki kind of new age beliefs started to infiltrate, even essential oils. As those things started to infiltrate Mormon culture, that's when I started hearing about things like vibrations. That's not traditional Orthodox Mormon doctrine in my experience. But the one thing I will say is demonic possession, and this is where I had a conversation with my dear friend, demonic possession, 100% Mormon doctrine. I can't tell you the hundreds of missionaries and Mormons that have emailed me about their demonic possession stories as mainstream believing Mormons, as missionaries, as members of bishoprics, etc. demonic possession is both extremely Mormon and extremely Christian in my view. Okay, sorry, I had to rant a little bit. Lauren, why don't you go next?
Follow that.
Yeah, take me down.
Well, I do appreciate you saying that. Again, I want to put blame where blame is. Chad Daybell took a lot of this. And I will say, I don't think that if we're going to talk systems and holding systems responsible, I don't think it was just Mormonism that inspired Chad Daybell. I think there's a little bit of Q involved. I think there's some political inspiration here. I think there's some Hollywood inspo. So I do appreciate you actually saying that. And we need to put blame where, yes. And I want to say as someone who, was raised LDS, I do recall like blessings over places, like dedications. But I can honestly tell you as someone who went to church every week, I agree with you that demonic possession is Mormon or Christian. Christ cast out evil spirits. But I can also tell you that I never experienced that as someone that's LDS, but I agree with you. So I just think there are a garden variety of Mormons. That's a Barbara term right there. It's a barbarism.
Okay. Megan?
Yeah, as a card carrying member of the church for, most of my life, I never heard anything about dark and light or castings or anything like that, but there definitely was the talk of evil spirits, and I just always remember the phrase from the hymn. I think it's "Dearest children, God is near you." There's a line that says, "Dearest children, holy angels watch your actions night and day, and they keep a faithful record of the good and bad you say." And I took that very literally as a member, even to the point where I didn't want to say things out loud unless I was, I was watching what I said, essentially, because I'm like, oh, somebody's going to write that down. I wouldn't even pray out loud, because I also was taught that the adversary can hear your prayers and he knows what you're talking about. And so he knows ways to tempt you then. And, those kinds of things stuck with me for a really long time. And it took me a really long time to deprogram myself from believing that I was literally being watched all the time.
Got it. Okay. Great. All right. Well, let's go to the next slide. The sort of the description characterizes in this clip is Chad being smug. Pryor describing this as an unusual case with a lot of talk about religion. Pryor tries to put into question the credibility of the detective. And if he tried to pass as an expert on Mormonism, and then later said he doesn't know much about Mormonism, how can we trust him? So let's go ahead and play the next clip.
This is an unusual case because there's a lot of talk about religion.
I agree.
And Mr. Daybell, do you know how long that blessing thing went on for?
I have no idea.
Yeah, me neither. Was it written? Was he reading off of something?
I wasn't there, so I
You
couldn't
didn't.
tell
You
you.
didn't hear pages in the video of him turning pages or anything? I thought I heard some pages turning.
I heard a garage door open.
Okay, I didn't hear that. Well, all right. Well, you got better ears than I do. We talked about that before. You know what Chad Daybell did for a living, right?
I know he was an author. I don't know other than
Wrote
that,
books.
yeah.
And as I was listening to that, it sounded like someone was writing a book. Would you agree with that?
Objection, Your Honor. I'm going to ask that the narrative be stricken. I think council can ask questions, but there's narrative being added.
Well, that, I'm going to make a ruling, Mr. Pryor. So on the last question, I'll overrule that, but to the extent it does become more narrative, Ms. Blake, you can object again.
Okay. Now, you know the name's Melanie Gibb.
Yes,
Did you ever interview her?
I did.
Okay. And David Warwick.
I know the name, but I never interviewed him.
And I could represent you that she was dating Melanie Gibb, eventually married Melanie Gibb. So
That
does
sounds
that
about-
recall?
sounds about right.
Okay. And then Zaluma Pastenes.
Yes,
Okay. All of these folks, members of the LDS faith.
it's my understanding, yes.
Okay. And all of them have made numerous references to some, at least what I would consider unusual beliefs.
True.
Talking about, as members of the LDS faith, they talk about vibrations. We've heard that, right?
Correct.
They talk about probationary periods,
I've heard that term, yes.
right? And that deals with what you did in your life before in that particular faith, what your role was in life before, right?
If you say so.
Well, I'm asking you because
I
if
don't.
you don't know about
I
that?
don't know.
Okay, and then there's some references to God and goddesses. You've heard about that, right?
I have heard that, yes.
Okay, and in the reference to God and goddesses, are you aware that in the LDS faith that as you move forward, you become a god and a goddess in their faith?
I'm not, no.
Okay, and are you aware that in the LDS faith that when you their God lives on a planet and then angels are brought down to communicate with us?
I'm not familiar with that, no.
Not familiar. How long were you involved in that faith?
Until I was 18.
Okay, so is it because you're not aware of it, or is it because you don't believe it was part of the faith?
No, I chose to practice a different religion.
Okay, so you're not aware, you're just telling me you don't know whether it's true or not.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right. As the guy who tries to focus on talking about Mormonism, I'm just going to referee there. Probationary periods, 1,000% mainstream Mormon doctrine. The spirit prison is where you go after you die if you haven't done all the right Mormon things, and you wait there and get taught to then decide whether or not you get to ultimately inherit whatever kingdom God wants to assign you to. So probationary periods, 100% core Mormon doctrine. This idea of theosis, that men and women can become gods and goddesses, 100% Mormon doctrine. Joseph Smith taught it as man is, God once was, and as God is, man may become. 1,000% Mormon doctrine. God living on a planet. Not only does God live on a planet, but Joseph Smith came up with the name of the planet God lives on, and he called it what?
Kolob.
What, Megan and Lauren?
Kolob.
Kolob.
K-O-L-O-B. So that's
It's
one.
also the place I got married.
Kolob,
Sorry,
Utah.
bad joke.
Kolob,
But Kolob Canyon.
Oh, okay, yeah. So that's 1,000%. Angels communicating with men. That's like Joseph Smith began by Moroni visiting him. The first vision story came like 7 years after the Moroni story. For Mormons don't know that, but that's pretty factual. And then when this guy admits that he left Mormonism at age 18, that means he never went through the temple, which is where a lot of this stuff, you're literally promised in the Mormon temple that you will become gods and goddesses once you take out your endowments and do the whole thing. And it's got gods and Jesus and Adam and Michael and Peter, James, and John walking around on a celestial planet with white robes and white beards and talking to each other, and it's showing Heavenly Father and Jesus, Elohim and Michael creating planets and worlds without end, and 1,000% Mormon stuff there. And so, yeah, this guy immediately, and I guess, Megan, you're saying he wasn't there to be a Mormon expert, so we shouldn't be holding him to the expectation of being a Mormon expert. Or is that what you're saying, Megan?
Yeah, that's right. He wasn't called as a witness to be the one that dictates what Mormon doctrine is or isn't. I think John Pryor is just trying to lead his narrative once again. But I think right here, he's kind of proving the prosecution's point that none of this was mainstream Mormonism, because this guy's like, I don't know, I've never heard of that before.
That's, I think, the problem with what he's doing is Megan's right. So that's what the judge means by he's going beyond the scope. This is not a Mormon expert. He's just trying to set this narrative with cross exam that these things are mainstream Mormon beliefs, and it's not working. I agree with Megan. Every person up there that is a law enforcement is like, yeah, don't know what you're talking about, which is why I do suspect that Chad Daybell is a little bit too confident in his defense. I can picture him saying, oh yeah, any Mormon, come on, John Pryor, any Mormon knows about this. They're going to know about this. Just bring it up. I got you. And then he's bringing it up and they're like, I have no idea what you're talking about. It's kind of backfiring.
I will add, just for fun, just for the nerds out there who want to nerd out on Mormonism, that it is a relatively modern change in Mormon doctrine and culture, probably starting in the 1980s, for the Mormon church to downplay and dismiss this teaching about theosis, about men and women becoming gods and goddesses, because what happened in the early, late 1970s, early 1980s, a movie called The Godmakers came out. And that's when evangelical Christians came hard at Mormons because they saw how much the Mormon church was growing. They were feeling threatened, or they were feeling offended by Mormon doctrine and theology. And so they created a movie called The Godmakers that started attacking Mormons for their belief that men and women can become gods and goddesses as heretical. And that didn't sit well on the church's image. And so Mormon prophet Gordon B. Hinckley, starting in the 80s, started downplaying and dismissing that core Mormon doctrine that Joseph Smith taught by calling it just a couplet, saying things to like Mike Wallace or Larry King, I forget who's like, well, we don't know a lot about that. I don't know that we teach it. I don't know that we practice it. Whatever it was that he said, he tried to downplay it because it sounds so not only odd, but it sounds blasphemous to mainstream Christians. So that's something that is core Mormon doctrine that a modern Mormon apologist will downplay. But, Lauren and Megan, was that a part of your Mormon upbringing, to be taught that that's our destiny, that the Mormon plan of salvation, the pinnacle of that is the celestial kingdom, where we'll literally become gods and goddesses ruling over our own planets as God and Heavenly Mother or mothers does right now?
Yeah, and if you want to kind of, sorry, Lauren,
No, you go first.
If you want to take it even a step further than that, we're taught that only people who make it to the celestial kingdom are going to have the opportunity to have children when you have your own planet, right? You're only going to be a god and a goddess if you're sealed. First of all, you have to be sealed to a man. You can't do this alone as a woman. And you have to, make it to the celestial kingdom in order to become a god and a goddess, and then have your own spirit children. So you're not going to be able to procreate in the next life unless you make it to the celestial kingdom.
All right. And Lauren, you were dying to jump in. So Lauren,
No, I wasn't dying. I was just, I wasn't taught like that. I was taught, I'll tell you what I was taught, that in eternal progression, the belief in, the question of whether or not it would be really fun to just praise Jesus for eternity on a cloud. Would we like that? Maybe to know that we can progress, continuing on into the hereafter forever and ever might sound more satisfying. I actually think, just so everybody knows, that this is where the idea of Mormons saying that there is more work being done on the other side comes from. This is something, that we believe, Mormons believe in eternal progression. I would say it was never taught to me, and then you get your own planet and you have to have spirit babies and you have to have a man. I'm not saying that others weren't. I feel like I always need to preface that with this. I'm not saying others weren't taught that. My upbringing did not include that, but it did include, which is pretty much a reworded version of eternal progression, and that you get to take the things you learned with you and continue on into eternity and continue to work. And I was also, yes, taught, though, that you can't go somewhere without a man, but they can't go somewhere without a woman. And I don't want to get into that right now, John. I can't even see them, but I'm like, I don't want to go there. So I don't even want to, that's for another episode. I do not want any cross exam on what I just said. I moved beyond the scope. So let's move on.
I'll just say, I just Googled, the Mormon Church has a super long essay on becoming like God. I would say that this is a modern correlated explanation. It's highly correlated, which means that it's doing its best to finesse and not look weird or odd. So you have to really read between the lines, but I'll just skip forward to the conclusion. And it says, all human beings are children of loving heavenly parents and possess seeds of divinity within them. In his infinite love, God invites his children to cultivate their eternal potential by the grace of God through the atonement of the Lord Jesus Christ. The doctrine of humans' eternal potential to become like their heavenly Father, and I'd say Mother, is central to the gospel of Jesus Christ and inspires love, hope, and gratitude in the hearts of faithful Latter-day Saints. So again, I think that language is softened to be more appealing, but even that, I think, calls the doctrine central. So that's my case. We don't have to belabor that point. All right. Let's go ahead and jump to the next slide, which is John Pryor saying, oh, by the way, I just have to share this for fun. This is a little challenge. Lauren, you'll like this. Texas Cat says, I'm here for Lauren. John DeLynn is a toxic, agenda-driven anti-Mormon. And maybe that's true. Maybe.
Take that. So there you go.
Boom.
That was one of my socks. I was like, hey, go on, get on there and
Go after John.
those were one of my sock accounts. I'm like, yeah, get him where it hurts. No, just kidding.
I would, you know, in all that is fun. And in all seriousness, if someone wants to show where something that I've said is wrong, inaccurate, I would love you to share that in the comments and I'll share it. And if I'm wrong, I'll apologize. I feel pretty good about my general understanding of Mormonism. I've been doing this for 20 or 30 years, depending on, but I'm wrong all the time. I'm wrong every day. So I welcome any of you to show me my ways, the error of my ways. Okay, let's go to the next slide. This is where John Pryor says he wants to show that Chad's beliefs are not out of the realm of discussion within the LDS faith. Let's see if John Pryor makes his case here.
And we're not trying to you agree with me, we're not trying to disparage the LDS faith, right?
No.
We're just trying to point out that the stuff they're talking about may not be something that's out of the realm of discussion within that faith, right?
I'd agree.
When you're talking about spirits and exercising spirits, such as Ned. I guess we talked about Ned, right? That wasn't with you with Ned. Never mind. But that's all of this stuff, because these folks were all actively involved in the LDS faith. These are things that came up as
Your Honor, objection. Counsel stating facts, not in evidence. And again, this is a narrative.
Sustained.
All right, Lauren, you were in the room. What'd you think about that?
Well, I just want to point out that when I bring up that Chad Daybell had a lot of inspo from other places besides Mormonism, Ned Schneider is maybe one example. He did not get that name from Mormonism. And I kid you not, I have a belief, and I've gone down this rabbit hole, that I actually think he named a lot of the zombies after characters found in The Simpsons. Except for Hillary. I do think that one was political. So I'm just saying, so Ned comes up. Megan, what did you think though of that? I mean, this is stuff, I mean, I know you can't make this stuff up. Someone, I don't know if you've seen Jury Duty, John. If not, you got to watch it.
I need to see it. Yeah, I need to see it.
But it's like an experiment. This guy thinks he's in jury duty and he's really not. It's just this wild experience. And some people said, are these people wondering like what the actual F is going on here? Or do they think this is some kind of experiment in there? I wonder, some of them think they're like being spoofed right now. Anyway, Megan.
Yeah, I think Chad and Alex shared an affection for the Simpsons because Alex's email address was Homer J. Maximus, I think.
Well, there you go. There you go. Proving my point, Megan.
I was just putting on my Mormon hat again. I will just say that this idea of exorcising demonic spirits, it's not just a core Mormon doctrine. It's a core feature of the priesthood. In the Mormon temple ceremony, literally Peter, James, and John, if I remember correctly, it's been a while. They're in the Garden of Eden. Satan's there. They literally raise their hand to the square and cast out Satan from the garden. I've already showed there are graphics on the Mormon Church's website where it shows a man standing up with his arm to the square, casting out a demon, and it shows the demon or the spirit running away. If you go right now, go to Mormon Church of Jesus Christ.org or whatever it is, and you Google casting out of spirits, casting out of demons, you'll find potentially dozens of references to prophets, seers, and revelators in Mormon scripture talking about the casting out of demons or the exorcising of evil spirits. And again, I heard stories growing up of people doing this. Lots of missionaries do it or hear about it on their missions. And it's not necessarily done every day or by everyone, but I would say it's a core. I did a survey, and between 30 and 40% of the people I've surveyed had some story about either exorcising demons or spirits, or seeing someone try to exorcise demons or spirits, or hearing from a family member or friend or missionary companion stories about exorcising demons or evil spirits. But you are not going to be able to convince me that at least 30 to 40% of Mormons, the idea of exorcising demons or spirits wasn't a part of their Mormon upbringing, or isn't to this day. The only other thing I'll say, back to the critic, if I can dish it back a little bit to that critic who just called me unfair and unbiased, I would say that some Orthodox or believing Mormons, when they hear truths about their church that they feel are embarrassing, or that they don't know about, or that they worry are going to hurt their reputation, sometimes they'll call the person saying those truths anti-Mormon, or they'll call them bad names. They'll say they have an axe to grind, or they have a dark countenance, or whatever, because they are uncomfortable with hearing the quiet things said out loud. And so that's just a little bit of a friendly counter. Again, y'all don't have to agree with that. I just want to, I'll give, but I'll also take a little bit, and all that. Lauren,
I sense a dark spirit, and I'm going to say that you're a 4.6 right now. And so you can take that your friendly counter and throw that back at it. Sorry. Go ahead, Megan. That's all I got.
No, you're fine. I when I was about 13 years old, there was a girl in my Sunday school class who we all kind of thought was a little bit odd. She was a little bit out there. She was a little bit kooky. So every time she raised her hand, we expected something crazy to come out of her mouth. And I will never forget the Sunday school lesson where she said, "Oh yeah, I know how to tell the difference between an evil spirit and a good spirit. If you reach out your hand and you ask the spirit to shake your hand, the evil spirit will offer his hand, but the good spirit won't offer his hand." And I remember we all just turned it and looked at her, and we were like, "What are you talking about?" And then, to my shock and horror, the Sunday school teacher said, "Oh yeah, it's right here in the Doctrine and Covenants." And I was like, "What? Are you serious? This is a real thing?" I mean, it was the first time that I was really taken aback by something that I was really surprised to hear. Wait, this is something we actually believe. So that was a strange moment for me.
Yeah. And if we wanted to, I could pull up, I'll give people the reference. I'll just show this on the screen. I'll show it. I'll maximize it. Doctrine and Covenants, section 129, verses 4 through 7, explains that if a messenger is a resurrected being whose flesh one feels when shaking hands, that the messenger is an angel from God. But spirits that are evil and are trying to deceive you cannot clasp hands, since they do not have flesh and bones with which to do it. And according to Joseph Smith and Jesus and Mormon doctrine, an evil spirit will try to shake your hand, and this is in Mormon scripture, and then you'll go to shake it, but then you won't feel anything, and that's how you know it's an evil spirit. 100% in Mormon scripture, doctrine, and covenants. Okay, let's go ahead and go to the next slide. where Pryor apparently states that giving a patriarchal blessing is not a crime. Let's roll that.
So you're not suggesting, because Chad Daybell gave Alex Cox a patriarchal prayer, that in some way he was involved in the killing of Charles Vallow, are you?
I didn't say that.
Okay. And from what I understand, and please correct me, you have 18 years more experience than I do. I have 0. Giving a patriarchal prayer to someone, regardless of whether you can do it or not, is that a crime in Maricopa County?
No,
Okay, you wouldn't think that's a crime anywhere, right?
correct.
Okay. It may not be the best religious practice. There may be other issues, but it's not a crime anywhere, right?
Correct.
And you would agree with me that just because you give someone a patriarchal prayer, a very, very long patriarchal prayer, that isn't to insinuate that you've committed any kind of a crime, right?
Correct.
Okay.
All right. What do you guys think? No crime in a patriarchal blessing.
I mean, it's true. There's no crime there.
Okay.
I mean, I agree, Pryor.
I just want to point out that every time John Pryor mentions the length of Chad's patriarchal blessing, he smirks. He's really proud that that patriarchal blessing was such a long blessing. He's really, really proud of himself.
Although,
Yeah, I agree. I noticed that too.
have y'all ever experienced a long Mormon prayer before?
Yes.
More times than I care to recount.
Yeah.
We can give long prayers.
Uncle Barry's prayers were the longest prayers in history.
Oh, yeah. I can't imagine. I can't imagine.
All right, let's roll the next clip. I'll just roll it.
Please read those into the record.
Chad sent Lori a message stating, "I love you. This is terrible, but it is probably another step in bringing down the Gadiantons, especially Brandon." Lori sent Chad a message to Chad. "Nope, he can change it anytime he wants. He's the agent, and anyone can change their beneficiary anytime with their own signature. I'm thinking it must be Kay." Chad sent a message to Lori. It will be interesting if it got changed after he had 2 bullets in his chest."
Man, that's dark. They're talking about life insurance policies, beneficiaries, and death and murder. Megan, do you want to start on that?
Yeah, I put this clip in here because this was testimony about obviously Charles having changed the beneficiary on his life insurance and Lori finding out about it. And I only put it in there because she made reference to the Gadiantons. And for those who are not Mormon or who haven't read the Book of Mormon, the Gadianton robbers were a group of robbers,
You sent
murderers.
Rob Wood a text that.
Oh, sorry.
Who wreaked all kinds of havoc in Book of Mormon times. And they were, it was Gadianton robbers were synonymous with just really evil people. And it's kind of this theme throughout the Book of Mormon of secret combinations, meaning people who are forming groups that have secret rituals and secret handshakes and secret meetings and secret beliefs. And they go around committing crimes and killing people. And so they're trying to say that the person who changed the beneficiary, or they're trying to say that all these people that are against Lori are Gadiantons. But to me, that description kind of matches the cult more than it does anybody else.
All right, Megan, Lauren, what's your take?
I mean, I start to get irreverent during these times in court. Not the dark parts, but when we bring up Gadianton robbers, and I hear that this crew is like texting each other about Gadianton robbers, and I can't help but just roll my eyes a little bit. But this is about as Mormon as you can get. And there was a moment where they explain who the Gadianton robbers are in court, and they have to do a whole description about them being in the Book of Mormon. Just this is what is happening in court every day.
Yeah, and we haven't gotten there yet with the evidence on this trial, but later on there are text messages between Zulema and Lori where Zulema asks what happened with Charles, and Lori responds that it was a Nephi-Laban ending. And that's a reference in the Book of Mormon, just within the first few pages of the Book of Mormon, where Nephi gets commanded by an angel to chop off the head of Laban, who's the wicked king, who's trying to keep Nephi from getting the golden plates that the Book of Mormon is written on.
And that's a great thing to bring up, Megan, because again, no, the Mormon Church doesn't necessarily produce more murders per capita. And of course, the Mormon Church teaches murder is evil, except in chapter 3 of the Book of Mormon. So 3 chapters in to the book that the Mormon Church teaches is the most correct book on earth, more accurate than the Bible, has the fullness of the gospel, right? On chapter 3, the main hero of the first half of the book, his name is Nephi, receives a vision from God that he's supposed to kill this man named Laban by chopping off his head to get these things called the brass plates, which is basically to get his scriptures. And so, the Mormonism's most sacred scripture is basically too many saying, if you get a deep spiritual prompting that you should kill someone, it's from God and you got to obey God. And of course, most Mormons would never follow that, but some have. And another example of that is the Lafferty brothers, who were featured in the biography by John Krakauer called Under the Banner of Heaven. And there was a documentary made about that. And there have been others who were influenced by that teaching. And again, this is something the Mormon Church leaders could just say, hey, whatever it says in the Book of Mormon, if you ever feel that God is telling you to kill somebody, disregard it. That's Satan. Don't ever do it. But they've never, ever done that. And so that leaves some people to conclude that if the Spirit tells them to do it, they got to obey the Spirit, because that's what the Book of Mormon says. I know that's strong, but I think
No, you're right.
Of First Nephi is problematic, in my opinion.
It's incredibly problematic, and you can equate it. That's absolutely a story they need to stop teaching. So, I have the scripture memorized. It is better that one man perish than a nation dwindle in unbelief, because I was taught that, and they need to stop teaching that. But the same with Abraham and Isaac. That's another terrible story from the Bible that they just need to stop teaching. We should probably all stop teaching those types of stories.
Yeah, mainstream members are really quick to point out that, Nephi didn't just receive a spiritual prompting to kill Laban. He was visited by an angel. And so that made it okay. I'm sorry, it's still not okay. It's still not okay to teach about justifiable homicide when you've got a group of people who are receiving personal revelation, who believe that every good feeling that they have comes from God. And maybe it's, they're getting a good feeling about, let's take the example of Lori and Chad. Lori sits in this meeting that Chad speaks at, and Chad starts saying, some of you here are going to be instrumental in gathering the 144,000. And Lori's really excited to be meeting in person this author that she's fangirled over for such a long time, that these butterflies in her stomach or whatever, she interprets as the Spirit of God telling her, you're going to be one of the 144,000. And then sure enough, she goes up to Chad after the meeting probably and says, hey, I think it's me. I think I'm going to be one of those. And Chad's like, I'll tell this girl anything she wants to hear. So yeah, you know what? You are going to be instrumental. You see just how quickly it goes off the rails.
Yeah. And I made a mistake. I just fact checked myself. It's not First Nephi chapter 3. It's First Nephi chapter 4. So open up your scriptures, brothers and sisters, to First Nephi chapter 4. Are you guys laughing? I see some smiles there. And I'll just read it. And again, I knew that the Lord had delivered Laban into my hands for this cause, that I might obtain the records according to his commandments. Therefore I did obey the voice of the Spirit, and took Laban by the hair of the head, and I smote off his head with his own sword. So that's Nephi in the Book of Mormon smiting off Laban's head with his own sword. God couldn't just like give him special powers to put Laban asleep, to make him doze off a little bit or turn the other way. Had to lop off his head. There is no other way. All right. The very last slide that we have.
Lauren wants to
I'm
comment.
good.
Please
Please keep
do.
going. It can wait. It
Okay.
can wait.
Well, so before we do the last slide, I'll just explain what it is. So yesterday, Melanie Gibb was on the stand. And if you'll remember, Melanie Gibb is Lori's bestie. And so she was there for all of this. And she had a front row seat to everything. And she very early on planted this seed with, with prosecutors and defense attorneys alike, that her memory wasn't very good. And I think she did that specifically because she didn't want to say everything that she knew. She wanted to be able to say, I don't recall. We call her Melanie Fib. She just keeps saying, I don't recall over and over. And then if she gets caught out on a lie or something, she says, oh yeah, that's just because my memory is so bad. So I will say I didn't clip the entirety of her testimony because it takes her 15 minutes to answer one question. And that's not an exaggeration. The question is that she had text communications with Rob Wood, who is the prosecuting attorney. And in one of those text communications, she says something about protecting the church. And so John Pryor is trying to destroy her credibility by saying that her main goal in testifying was not to tell the truth, but it was to protect the church. And it takes Melanie Gibb 15 minutes to answer that question and say that no, she wasn't. But I clipped out just a portion of it so that we could get the gist of what she's saying.
All right. Let's look. This is the final clip, and then we have a few more closing statements to make. So stay to the end for all the value here. Let's go ahead and play this final clip.
You sent Rob Wood a text at that time, correct?
Yes,
And there's Laura at the bottom
And
left.
the text was from you to Rob Wood.
correct.
And in the text, you talked about Keith, the guy from Dateline, and I, right? And is that the Keith Morrison? Is that the guy we're talking about?
Yes,
Okay. Want to make sure the church is protected. Do you recall that?
yes,
He has done a good job so far. That's why I feel comfortable talking to him. Is that what you said to the prosecutor?
I think so. Yes,
Is there any reason to dispute what I just read is not what you read just 2 minutes ago?
yes, that's fine.
So the question I have with that is, if what you're saying is that, well, you wanted to get the story right in terms of the beliefs of the LDS faith, why are you sending that to a prosecuting attorney who's prosecuting Chad Daybell?
Stunned silence.
Are you finished?
I am finished. I'm waiting for an answer.
I felt comfortable talking to Rob to let him to know what I was doing. I just felt comfortable sharing that just to let him know what I was up to. Yeah.
So you were sharing with Rob Wood, the prosecuting attorney, that it's your intent to protect the LDS church with your testimony, right?
I guess you could say that.
Okay.
That wasn't the whole point of the interview, but
I understand that.
yeah,
The point of this text was that, right?
I guess so.
Right. And the 340 other texts between May 6th of 2020 and November 4th of 2020, were those just to say hi?
No,
Okay. So in other words, what was happening here is that there was at least some sort of a relationship built between you and this prosecutor about how and when and where you were going to testify about things in this case. Is that right?
Objection, Your Honor, misstates the testimony.
Sustained.
The point of all this communication between you and Mr. Wood, the prosecuting attorney in this case, was to establish how you planned on testifying in this case and what you were going to say.
It wasn't the established reason why I communicated with him.
And it was just a coincidence then that you happened to mention your church and how you were going to protect your church to the prosecutor who was going to be calling you and examining you as a witness in this case. That's just a coincidence, right?
Objection, Your Honor, argumentative.
Sustain.
All right. Megan.
I'm interested to hear your thoughts.
Lauren.
And I was interested to hear yours. This was the moment, just, I was in court. Well, I guess I wasn't. Was I not? This is the moment I texted. I was sitting on the couch because, I was sick yesterday. This was yesterday, right? All the days blur now. And that was my little face in the thumbnail. And I think I texted Gerardo and John, or was it you, Megan? I can't remember. All the group texts we have, just like, dude, this is big. We have every conspiracy theory that ever has been about this case just combined into this one explosive moment, in my opinion, where the prosecutor on the case that is LDS, Rob Wood, is getting accused by the defense of corroborating with a witness, like getting together with a witness, one of the best witnesses, most important, I wouldn't call it, but the most important witness on the case, Melanie Gibb, and to try to protect the church. I was just like, this was a really, really big moment. That was the argument that John Pryor was making, and definitely what he was laying out. And I think that what he had said earlier was, as Megan points out, that this was maybe cause for impeachment of the prosecutor, Rob Wood. We don't have context of the text. We do know that Keith Morrison did interview Melanie Gibb, and she did that interview, and clearly she felt that Keith Morrison would be kind to the church. I can't say that that's never something that I haven't been asked as I interview people. Like, am I going to be non-biased and respectful? I'm sure you're asked that too. So we don't know the context, but this was a jaw-dropping moment for John Pryor to drop this in this case.
Yeah, it's definitely fits in with that conspiracy theory narrative that, if witnesses are changing their testimony or are altering it or are avoiding saying things because they don't want the church to look bad, then, that looks bad for the prosecution, and it looks bad, from the point of view that, there's grounds for appeal right there is what he's sowing those seeds for. I think what we'll find, though, is that if they actually do bring those texts into evidence, they're going to find that it was Rob Wood discussing with Melanie Gibb, who is a witness for the prosecution. And this was not the Keith Morrison interview. It was about her first interview with Nate Eaton. And that's why she said, I think he's done a good job so far. I think she trusts Nate Eaton to interview her, and she was checking with Rob Wood to see if it was okay if she did an interview. I think that's all that was.
I actually think it was specifically about Keith Morrison, though.
Was it?
I think, because it was the same interview, and that was Dateline had been covering the case from the very beginning.
Yeah.
And she felt that Keith Morrison had been fair. She trusted Nate completely because he's Mormon.
Yeah.
But they had to talk about Keith Morrison and she said that he thought that he had been fair to the church so far.
Okay. Got it.
That was because Nate's Mormon,
sense.
so he's a no-brainer. But I think that she was excited to go with Keith because that was also an interview done at the same time because they partnered together to do that interview. So.
Yeah. And I also think, 360 texts over the course of 8 or 9 months is not that many, especially when you consider that half of them are being sent and half of them are being received, so it's like Rob Wood might have sent her 150 or 160 texts over the course of 8 months. And she's a pretty key witness for the prosecution. So that doesn't seem all that out of ordinary to me. Am I wrong about that?
No, yeah, I agree. I think, I agree. Because it is hard to know the full context, right? Melanie Gibb is very, very religious. Clearly, she bought this crap, and if I'm going to just lay it out there, and it wouldn't surprise me necessarily if she did text this to the prosecution, that this is a concern of hers. Like whatever interviews she chooses to do, she wants to make sure that they're going to paint the church in a good light because that's her religious goal. I mean, would you agree that it doesn't surprise me that Melanie Gibb is thinking in those terms because of just simply who she is? She frames her entire life within a small little box of religion. That's fair to say. But what Rob Wood is saying is a question. How we got there, the context is a question.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I think Melanie Gibb is for Melanie Gibb. I think she knows way more than she's willing to testify to. And I think that she has played this entire thing to protect herself from being implicated in the crimes, because she was right there. She knew everything. She was in the trusted circle. I think that there's no way that she didn't know some of the things that Lori and Alex were up to. And I think you're right about her being devoutly religious, and it would be a major concern for her to not say things that would be disparaging to the church. So she's probably feeling really proud of herself right now that, in this huge public forum, that she got to be seen as her biggest concern was defending the church, not telling the truth, not telling the truth, not saving the children, not impeaching the man who
the church and herself.
Yeah, protecting the church and protecting herself. The end.
If I can be a little bit immature for a minute, when we learned today, or were told again today, that her zombie name was Phoebe, I started giggling to myself because it sounds like Phoebe, and now she's already known as Melanie Phibb, and now she's Phoebe Phibbs. So yes, there you go. If I'm gonna pull a Trump and call people nicknames, but I completely agree that she knows more than she knows. And she's in it for herself and protecting her religion. And I think she's made that very clear in all of her police interviews. So I'm not necessarily surprised, like you say, Megan, that she took the, that she's riding with the prosecutor. And she also has this tunnel vision where she just assumes everybody thinks the exact same way she thinks. Because I've watched all of her police interviews. That's how she functions. So to give Rob Wood some space and some possibility, I could see Melanie Gibb simply writing that, just thinking that that's Rob's concern too. But I would really like to know what Rob's texts were. I wonder if we'll ever find out.
Yeah, it would be really, really interesting if 349 of them were from Melanie, just trying to fangirl with Rob Wood. Oh, I'm important to the case, that kind of thing.
Yeah. John's here nodding like, I don't know what the heck you guys are talking about, but
No,
let's get back to Mormonism. He goes, that's my...
No, not at all. I'm just sitting at the feet of two brilliant women. I will say, when I listened to Ruby Frankie's sort of apology that she gave at her sentencing hearing, I got the sense that she was doing her best to protect and defend the Mormon Church. That was just my impression. And I do not doubt for a second that if a Mormon is in jail, or if a Mormon is going to be taking the witness stand, that the church, and it's going to be a public hearing or a public trial, I guarantee the Kurt McConkie attorneys and or church PR make themselves available to those people so that they get coached on what they might say. Or
Probably.
Even if they're not coached, that a good something that's very Orthodox Mormon is to, whenever you speak publicly, to do your best to protect and defend and build up the church. And frankly, we make temple covenants as Mormons when we go to the temple, to never speak ill of the Lord's anointed and to consecrate our lives to the building up and the strengthening of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So that's part of what it means to be a Mormon, is to do everything you can to never make the church look bad, and to do everything you can to be a missionary, every member a missionary, and to build up the good name of the church, to protect and defend the good name of the church. Am I wrong?
No, I think you nailed it. And I think you just called out Melanie Gibb because just so you know the history, John, and I know that, you haven't been following this every which way since 2020, and Megan and I are always talking, all about all these little, minute details. But Melanie Gibb, when she first came on the scene, before we had any evidence dumps or FOIA requests and we're reading the evidence ourselves in our hands, Melanie Gibb came on the scene with this, sort of bombshell interview she did with Dateline and East Idaho News and Clear the Air. And it was very informative and it did paint her in a very decent picture. I do think that was her goal because she is a very, very, very important witness. And then as time goes on and the evidence comes out and the police interviews come out and you learn that she's like in the townhouse when JJ loses his life and she's hanging out with Chad and Lori and knows that JJ's a zombie and all this stuff is coming out. People's minds are blown and you're like, this girl isn't that innocent. My point being, just to corroborate what you said, John, is yes, I think this interview for the prosecution's key witness was very important to paint her in a good light and likely the church. That would be her goal. And the church wanted nothing to do with this, So I agree with what you're saying that this was quite, it was a PR kind of a interview. And then the truth came out and the true crime community was there for it.
I love it. All right. Well, it's time to kind of wrap up. I'll just say a couple quick things. Just quickly going back to this discussion of like insurance fraud, basically. I do want to note something that's very Mormon is that Utah, by many reports, FBI, CIA, people who study business fraud, consistently Utah is ranked as the fraud capital of the United States per capita. Correct me if I'm wrong, Lauren, or if you've heard that.
I believe you. I'm listening.
I've definitely heard that. And I think some of that comes from some of the MLMs, let's just say the illegal or unethical MLMs or MLM culture that sometimes informs Utah. That's not to say all MLMs are bad. I have friends who do MLMs, so I don't want to disparage them unfairly. I just think there's also just a lot of fraud here. So I think that's something that is very Mormon is just this idea of fraud and the practice of fraud. Okay. So we've got a ton of really fun comments that I won't have time to share, but I do want to give each of you, Lauren and Megan. Lauren, why don't you just take a second and tell us just any other reflections you have about how the case is going so far, what you feel about it, and what you perceive and what direction you see it heading in. And then and then Megan, I want to hear emotionally as the cousin to what was that?
I want to hear this too. Go ahead. I'm like, yeah, sorry, talking out loud.
Lori, as the cousin of Lori and as someone who's a family member and whose, family members have passed on, have died because of these murders, how you feel. So Lauren, we'll have you go first and then Megan will have you follow.
Okay. Well, first off, before I jump to the trial, to your fraud thing, I don't have the facts like you have on that, but I will say that if we're going to talk about systems, one thing I see with Mormonism, and it's actually one of the favorite parts of the faith that I grew up with that I love, but it's a problem, I think, and I'll explain, is Mormons are taught that everybody is our brothers and sisters, that we're here to help one another, that we are here to lift one another no matter what, and to forgive everyone, that everybody's on this journey and we must forgive and we are all brothers and sisters. And while that's a beautiful idea, I do think it creates for oftentimes a gullible community sometimes, or people that don't stand up for things when they should, the emperor wears no clothes sort of mentality, or just trusting. And so I just want to share that as somebody that grew up and understands the beauty of that. And now someone that covers true crime and has life experience in my tool belt. I do think that's problematic in highly religious communities. And I want to point that out too. And I think that played a part in this crime. And that will help me segue into what I'm seeing in court. So these are people that, just naively followed and believed and trusted when they should have put their critical thinking caps on, and I don't know where those were. They're hanging in their portal closets somewhere. How is it going in trial? It's been nerve-wracking. The first few days were rough, if I'm going to be honest. I was getting really nervous. Pryor did a great job on his opening statements, slut-shaming Lori and claiming that Chad has nothing to do with these belief systems. I didn't feel like the prosecution was that on. I feel like as the evidence comes out, that's the beauty of evidence, right? That evidence starts to come out, those receipts, and you start seeing that I don't know if there is any way that Chad Daybell is going to get out of this, no matter what the defense plays, no matter what the defense hands. But I don't know. It takes one person with some reasonable doubt and this jury to say, you know what, I'm not so sure. I think it's Lori's fault. So it is definitely nerve-wracking for those of us that have followed this case for nearly 5 years to think that justice might not be served to 3 innocent people who were brutally murdered in Idaho and then buried in Chad Daybell's own yard. Children being burned and mummified, and let's hope. For me, I just hope that justice is served, but I feel confident in the evidence that we are seeing. A couple other things I want to point out too, because the Firm Expo and these conferences, these Preparing to People conferences and Firm Expos have come up before. And I know that when we have brought up the Firm Expo, John and Megan, in previous episodes we have done, I know that Rod Meldrum, the founder of the Firm Expo, wrote me, I've attended a Firm Expo, and he wanted to absolutely separate himself from, Chad. He didn't trust Chad. And I believe Rod, I believe that. I'm not discounting what he's sharing there. But the Firm Expo has absolutely made its way into this trial. And as something that all of these people go to, I'm not saying anybody is guilty by association. But what I do think is a lot of these beliefs and a lot of these ideas can infiltrate into these communities and that have these like-minded beliefs. And for example, one of the things that was said about the Firm Expo was John Pryor asked, so what is a Firm Expo? What did you learn there? And they went and attended a Firm Expo the day JJ was killed. And she said, well, you just learn about science. And I want you guys to know that, the science that you learn at the Firm Expo, I went to one class where they taught us that dinosaurs lived among humans, and that the reason why they died actually is because they didn't, essentially get on Noah's Ark. And I don't even want to mock anyone that believes that, but it's not science. It's not science. And then the people that did the Preparing to People, which is now LDS Media, have made their way into this. And they're also were friends with Rod and working with him then with all of these speakers. And they talked about how they believed in this dark and light scale and were calling spouses dark, and they were predicting that wives were going to die. Chad is saying with confidence that, yes, I knew that Tammy was going to die. It's almost like it's part of his defense. Like it's, that a critical thinking human being wouldn't see that is evidence that you were plotting her death, that he just had a vision she was going to die. So that should be a good defense. I just hope that we learn from this for any Mormon watching, and I say Mormon on purpose. This isn't members of the LDS faith. I'm talking anyone that's Mormon, whether you, like I always say, whether you are X or anti or Jack or active or TBA, whatever, I don't even know the terms now. If Mormonism has affected your life, I think we need to be taking a really hard look at this case, because this affected a lot of people. And we don't even know all of the surviving victims and that are there and, that are around, that so many people have been affected and so much could have been done. I interviewed Larry Woodcock, JJ's grandfather, yesterday. We were having dinner and we jumped on a live, and he was yelling and he was upset. They killed my 7-year-old grandson. And he said, this circle of friends, he called them a circle of jerks. One of them could have said something. One of them could have done something. And so that's why I think this case is so important to me. This is really just, I think we need to understand how this happens, because this is in our, if you're Mormon, this is in your backyard. This is real. This is happening with people, and I I hope we see justice. I'm in there every day. We're covering the trial every day too on Hidden True Crime. And if anybody wants to get invested in this case, if I can just pitch something really quick, one episode that Hidden True Crime has done. If anybody wants to learn about this case and they need a crash course, that's exactly what we have on our channel. It's called the Chad Daybell Crash Course. And that lays out all the religious aspects and elements of this case. And I hope that people just start paying attention. This is a very important case for Mormonism, for critical thinking, for cults, for so many reasons.
Love it. Amen. Yes. Thank you, Lauren. Please check out Hidden True Crime YouTube channel. Subscribe to it. Support them. Dr. John, shout out to him. He's amazing. And we want you guys to just keep growing. I love the number 144,000, but let's make it 288,000 and then beyond. Is that
There
okay?
you go. Well, let's see. Ruby Frankie got to 2 mil, right? So
let's at least double that.
there you go. There you go.
Megan, bring us home. What are some final thoughts and words you have? And then I'll share a couple final things. Megan.
Sure. Yeah. This case has been, it's been a really long, difficult journey as a family member, starting with, as I said at the beginning of the episode, starting with a Facebook post, finding out that Charles had been killed. And because of the healthy boundaries that I have around myself and my kids and my space, there were a lot of family members that I was not in touch with. And so it was, really difficult throughout this process to find out about the deaths of family members on the news from strangers rather than from family members, and to have not been able to really process and mourn, because this whole thing is extended out and it's going to continue to go on with Lori's trial in Arizona. And just the grief that I constantly feel, maybe not constantly, but the grief that comes up for me a lot is that this part of the family, especially, I can only learn the truth about them by reading FOIA documents because of all of the secrecy and the shame and the hiding and the lying and the manipulating that has gone on for lifetimes. And that's the main thing that I want people to understand and take away about this case, is that we all know somebody like Lori. We all know somebody who manipulates people to get what they want. We all know somebody who tells lies to gain advantage. We all know somebody who puts on one face in public and has a different side in private, especially if you get on their bad side or do something they don't like. And I just want people to be more aware of those behaviors. And then secondly, to hold those people accountable by calling them out, by saying, no, that's not true. No, you can't say that. No, don't act like that. And again, I'm with Larry. I was right there with him last night wanting to yell and scream, because if one person had held Lori accountable, if one person had held Alex accountable, if one person in that family was willing to tell the truth instead of cover it up and hide it because it's so shameful, then those kids might still be alive. And it's just really important to me that people understand that liars and manipulators, of course, not all of them go on to kill people, but all of them do real damage and real harm, whether it's emotional or physical or whatever it is. That kind of behavior, when it's unchecked, it just goes on and it causes so much harm. And I just hope that people take away that there are healthier ways to relate as a family, and that a lie is so much more damaging than the truth, even when the truth is really, really painful and difficult to deal with.
Beautiful, heartfelt. Thank you, Megan. Really appreciate it. We know this is personal to you and to you, Lauren, investing so much of your life in this. So y'all are both just dear friends and super special people. And I'm so grateful and honored that you'd be willing to come on this podcast. Really quickly, let me just share some quick comments. Stephanie writes, love all three of you. Thank you for covering these horrendous extreme beliefs that are allowing children and others that aren't not being protected. Thank you, Stephanie. Rennie writes, the best thing about Mormon Stories podcast is how long they are. I love that they really go into it. Now, Lauren, are your podcasts sometimes lengthy too? I'm guessing they are. They've got to be.
Not this long.
How about yours, Megan? How long are yours?
Mine are pretty short for the most part because it's just me. But once I start having guests on there, it's going to be like this probably.
Well, I can't recommend it. It's just what I did. And I started doing Mormon Stories in 2005 before YouTube really existed. That's how long I've been doing this. I just would start talking to people and wake up and there'd be 5 hours, not wake up, but look at the clock and then 5 hours going by. And I just never stopped because my viewers and listeners won't let me stop. They tell me they tune in because of the depth. So you get what you get with Mormon Stories. Hopefully you get some good views and a little bit of revenue from this, both of you. A couple more comments. Mrs. Lonely Hearts writes, I was taught in seminary, if I felt scared babysitting, it was evil spirits, and I needed to raise my arm to the square. And that looks like Olympus High School, 1990, which is in Holiday, which is close to me. So that's one vote for demonic casting. Gingy Probs writes, I grew up Southern Baptist, and I'm familiar with all these things. I'm forever grateful that Mormons think SBs are kooky, Southern Baptists, and Southern Baptists think Mormons are a cult. If their powers combined, it would be bad. That's a great comment from Gingy Probs. Thank you for sharing. Let's see. This one was starred, I think, John. Oh, no, I'm not going to read that one. She's saying I'm not a bad guy. So thank you for that. I can't read that one. Jill writes, thank you for even having this discussion. And then she says she's been listening and finds me to be fair. That I didn't start that. That was automatically starred. A couple other super chats. Destone writes, it is healthy to cross-examine your belief system. We agree. Destone also writes, thank you, Lauren, John, and Megan. We need your voice. I agree. Lisa writes, my ordained Baptist minister grandpa did exorcisms. No one died. I agree with exorcism, but murder is murder. That's a good perspective. Ladybug Lisa writes, powerhouse panel. Thanks for all you do. People love it, by the way. My listeners and viewers love it when I collaborate with Lauren, Megan, and of course, Mindy. Curse her for not being here.
We miss you, Mindy. We need a binder.
Where are binders? We need binders. Walkie Talkie writes, I listen to you at night to sleep because I love your voice. Great. I won't be hurt by that. SS writes, I use Mormon Stories to fall asleep. There's a trend. Laura writes, it is the voice of quiet power. This is referring to maybe Chad's voice.
Yeah, Chad's voice.
Speak quietly so others have to be even more quiet to listen to your wisdom. I'm sure that applies to Warren Jeffs as well. Forever Wander 03 writes, FYI, Pryor has a major prior that makes his defense of Chad, quote, Lori was just too sexual. It's not Chad's fault. Very ironic. I don't what is being
so
said?
Pryor has a prior offense. So he was charged battery for it was a woman that came for an internship or an interview, and she claimed, she claimed rape and something that wasn't consensual. He claimed consensual, and he actually claimed that she needed some money. So, and that they agreed to it.
All right. Well, I didn't mean to spread something that wasn't true, but that was a comment.
That's accurate.
Yeah. Okay. Mr. Midwife writes, I wish the Mormon church would denounce all of these side groups. That's a great point.
100%.
These are all super chats, by the way. So thanks to everyone for their donations. Your super chats support all of us as creators, and we couldn't do it without your donations or your super chats. Mrs. Lonely Hearts writes, if Shouty John is wrong, I don't want to be right. I only shared that because it was a super chat. Lisa writes, I'm a never Mormon, but Mormon Stories has helped me heal from my religious trauma. Mrs. Lonely Hearts also writes, best collab. And then Lisa writes, Thank you, John, Megan, Lauren, Maven, for your work.
Thank you, Maven.
Yeah, and Maven's been moderating the live chats, and of course, Julia does the time codes and show notes. Gerardo produced this episode. He created the thumbnail and he organized the slides, and it was his idea. And Gerardo scheduled it. So huge thanks to Gerardo, along with my board. Any thanks you want to give, Lauren?
Well, Maven.
Oh,
Thank you.
Oh, and I was thinking Dr. John. I'm sure you want to give him a shout out.
Oh yeah, love you, babe. Love you. Thanks for he is single parenting while I'm gone. This is a sacrifice for us, but I love him. Yeah, so thanks. Thanks, Dr. Babe.
All right, Megan.
Yeah, I want to say thank you to all of you guys. Dr. John too, Lauren as well. This coverage, your coverage of this case has helped me to heal and to process. So this has been really important to me.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks, y'all. And please check out Hidden True Crime Podcast, subscribe to it, like this episode, share it, comment, and support Lauren and Dr. John. Support Megan's new podcast called
The Midlife Revolution.
And the YouTube channel called
At _verse. Third verse.
Verse. And then please support Mormon Stories Podcast, subscribe to this episode, like it. And if you want to donate to Mormon Stories Podcast to make sure that this content continues, you can go to mormonstories.org, click on the donate button, become a monthly donor, and we'll keep producing this content. All right. Well, Lauren, you're going to keep attending every hour of every day of the hearing as you can. So, and you're doing like noon, midday live streams, but also people can watch the live stream from your channel. Right?
Correct. We're live streaming the trial on our channel,
What did I say?
and if it means anything to anyone, because we all agree at Hidden True Crime that sometimes you need a bit of dark humor just to get yourself through because it's hard, and so we have emojis over there for our trial watching, where we remember the victims, but also where we can giggle about some things like portals and zombies and the 144. So we're having fun over in chat while watching something really kind of traumatic. You gotta have a balance.
The chat's amazing. It's super fun. So check out.
Yeah. So,
It's
come join us over there. Yeah, we're streaming it every day. Megan's over there. Third Verse is over there. I'm usually in court. I was actually not feeling too well the last 2 days, so I watched on the couch. But if I'm not in court, I'm with the chat, and we're just gonna see this through. Tammy Daybell's aunt is there every day. A big support to her, and just this has been so hard on so many people, and it's I do believe that the support matters. There is going to be, someone just reminded me, I want to share, there is going to be a memorial service for the children. Megan is helping to plan this too, and is participating in it in Idaho Falls on the 27th of April, and it is open to the public. Megan, what time? It's at the Colonial Theater in Idaho Falls. What time does it start on the 27th? Do you know?
Visitation is from 11 to 1, and the service will be from 1 to 2.
Thank you.
And Megan might be singing. Is that right?
I will be, yeah.
Megan will be singing. I wasn't going to share that if you didn't want to. But yes.
Bombshell.
So if you want to meet the Megan, will you be there? You won't be there, Lauren. Is that right? Or
I will be there. Yeah. I'm going to go.
Go to that.
Yeah. It's a bit of a drive from Boise, but absolutely. Yeah.
It is going to be live streamed as well.
It'll be live streamed too. Right. So people can watch it. It'll be live streamed on East Idaho News, I believe.
One more time.
It's the 27th, Saturday.
At what time?
At 11 to 1 is the viewing, and then from 1 to 2 is the service.
And the Colonial Theater does fit 1,000 people. So it is something that the public is absolutely invited to, those who attend, and then it'll also be live streamed.
And that's in Idaho Falls, right?
Right.
Correct.
Not Twin Falls.
Idaho Falls.
All right. I'm going to see if I can go. I'm not sure if I
can come. Please come. Yeah.
And I think Gerardo and Mindy and I have talked about coming to Boise and maybe doing a little appearance and coverage and hangout with you, Lauren, and Megan, if you want to come. So that might be in the future.
Mormon Stories road trip.
Road trip.
All right. I'm looking forward to that. I hope that comes to fruition.
All right. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today. Thanks again, Megan and Lauren. Be good to each other. Be kind to each other. We do wish that justice is served. So let's all send out vibes to make that happen. Take care, and we'll see you all again soon on another episode of Third Verse, Hidden True Crime, and Mormon Stories Podcast. Take care, everybody.
Bye.